In this video, we're breaking down South Park's entire timeline. Let's get started. We're starting it off with the prehistoric age, prehistoric Iceman. In the South Park timeline, the earliest period shown is what the town believes to be the prehistoric age. This era takes place approximately 32 months before the year 1999, though the residents of South Park treat it as millions of years ago. This time period is shown in the episode Prehistoric Iceman from Season 2, which aired on the 20th of January 1999. This episode is extremely important to South Park lore because it establishes how the town responds to perceived prehistoric discoveries and reveals the willingness of South Park's residents and scientists to treat recent history as ancient history when it suits their interests. The Crocodile Hunter Inspiration. The episode began in Cartman's living room. Eric Cartman, Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, and Kenny McCormick were watching television together. On the screen was a program featuring the Australian Outback Guy. This was a character based on Steve Irwin from the Crocodile Hunter television series. The Australian Outback Guy was narrating his show. He said he was tracking a crocodile in the Australian Outback. He explained that the crocodile was a clever girl, and she would not be easy to catch. The camera showed a green crocodile in the water. The Australian Outback Guy said he was going to sneak up on her. The Australian Outback Guy approached the crocodile from behind. He said he would jam his thumb in the crocodile's butthole because this should really anger the animal. The Australian Outback Guy stuck his thumb into the crocodile's anus. The crocodile reacted with fury. The animal thrashed and bit at the man. The Australian Outback Guy wrestled with the crocodile. He said the animal was very angry with him now. The boys watching at home were fascinated by this program. Cartman said they should try that. Stan asked what Cartman meant. Cartman explained that they could be like the Australian crocodile hunter. Kyle said there were no crocodiles in South Park. Cartman said they could go to the mountains to look for them. The boys agreed this was a good idea. The Mountain Expedition. The four boys traveled to the mountains outside South Park. They were dressed in winter clothing because of the cold weather. Cartman was leading the expedition. He said they needed to be very quiet because crocodiles had excellent hearing. Kyle pointed out again that there were no crocodiles in Colorado mountains. Cartman ignored this observation. The boys walked through the snowy mountain terrain. Stan said he saw tracks. Cartman examined the tracks in the snow. He declared these were definitely crocodile tracks. Kyle said those were just footprints from a hiker. Cartman insisted they were crocodile tracks, and the boys should follow them. As they walked, Kyle stepped on ground that was unstable. The snow beneath his feet collapsed. Kyle fell down into a deep hole in the mountain. He screamed as he fell. Stan looked down into the hole and yelled for Kyle. Stan said, "Good job, Cartman. You killed Kyle." This was significant because typically when Kenny dies, Stan says this phrase about Kenny. Kenny responded by saying, "You bastard," which was also significant because Kyle usually delivers this line about Kenny. The discovery in the ice Stan got a rope from his backpack. He tied the rope around a rock and lowered himself down into the hole to rescue Kyle. Stan reached the bottom of the hole where Kyle was lying. Kyle said he was okay. Stan helped Kyle stand up. As Stan was helping Kyle, he noticed something in the ice wall of the cavern. There was a figure frozen in the ice. The figure appeared to be a human being. Stan said there was someone in the ice. Kyle looked at where Stan was pointing. Kyle saw the frozen figure. Stan said this was just like that movie where old cavemen get frozen and then people discover them and make them their caveman friends. This was a reference to the film Encino Man. Cartman called down from above, asking what was happening. Stan yelled up that they had found a frozen caveman. Cartman became excited. He said this was just like that one movie where John Travolta and that French chick were doing it all summer long, and then they went back to school and sang songs about grease lightning. This was a reference to the musical film Grease, which had nothing to do with frozen cavemen. Cartman had confused two completely unrelated films. Transporting the Iceman to town. The boys managed to extract the large block of ice containing the frozen figure from the cavern. They got the ice block to the surface of the mountain. They placed the ice block on a sled. All four boys pushed the sled down the mountain toward South Park. They were excited about their discovery and believed they would receive some kind of reward for finding the frozen man. As they pushed the sled into town, residents began to notice what the boys were transporting. People gathered around to look at the block of ice with the human figure inside. Someone said the boys had found a frozen person. Another resident said this was amazing. The crowd grew larger as more people came to see what the boys had discovered. Mayor McDaniels arrived at the scene. She looked at the frozen figure in the ice. She said this was incredible. She asked who they should contact about this discovery. Someone in the crowd suggested Dr. Mephisto. This was Dr. Alphonse Mephisto, a scientist who lived in South Park. Mayor McDaniels agreed that Dr. Mephisto should examine the frozen man. Dr. Mephisto's laboratory. Dr. Mephisto arrived to take possession of the ice block. He examined the frozen figure through the ice. He said he would need to take the specimen to his laboratory for proper analysis. Dr. Mephisto had the ice block transported to his laboratory facility. The laboratory was filled with scientific equipment and contained various genetic experiments that Dr. Mephisto had created. Stan and Kyle immediately began arguing about what to name the frozen man. Stan said they should name him Gorak. Kyle said they should name him Steve. Stan asked why Steve. Kyle explained that the frozen man looked like Steve Austin from the television series The $6 Million Man. This meant Kyle wanted to name the Iceman after a 1970s science fiction character. Stan insisted that Gorak was a better name for a prehistoric caveman. Kyle argued that Steve was a perfectly good name. The two boys began arguing more intensely. Cartman and Kenny watched as Stan and Kyle fought over the naming rights. The argument escalated. Stan said Kyle was being stupid about the name. Kyle said Stan was being stupid. Stan called Kyle a name. Kyle called Stan a name back. The argument was becoming a serious conflict between the two friends. The thawing process. Inside Dr. Mephisto's laboratory, the scientists prepared to thaw out the frozen man. Dr. Mephisto was accompanied by his assistant Kevin. Kevin was Dr. Mephisto's son, though Kevin had a genetic condition that gave him a severely underdeveloped body attached to the top of his father's head. Dr. Mephisto spoke to the press who had gathered at his laboratory. He said he believed the frozen specimen could be a Neanderthal or possibly an Australopithecus from the Paleolithic era. This meant Dr. Mephisto was claiming the frozen man could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of years old. Dr. Mephisto began the thawing process. He used scientific equipment to carefully melt the ice surrounding the frozen man. The ice slowly melted away. As the ice melted, the frozen man's features became more visible. He was wearing modern clothing. The clothing appeared to be from the brand Eddie Bauer. Dr. Mephisto examined the clothing and said he had not seen anyone wear Eddie Bauer brand clothing since 1996. This meant the frozen man was only from 3 years earlier, not from prehistoric times. After the ice completely melted, Dr. Mephisto made a shocking discovery. The man was still alive. His heart was still beating. His body had been preserved in a state of suspended animation by the ice. Dr. Mephisto announced that the Iceman was alive. The man opened his eyes. He looked around the laboratory in confusion. The Iceman speaks. The newly thawed man tried to speak. He said hello in perfect modern English. He asked where he was. Dr. Mephisto and the other adults in the room stared at him. Dr. Mephisto said the Iceman was attempting to communicate. The man said he was not an Iceman. He said his name was Larry. He asked what year it was. Dr. Mephisto ignored Larry's question and continued to treat him as a primitive specimen. Larry became frustrated. He spoke clearly in English, asking to know what was happening. The adults continued to act as though they could not understand him. This meant that despite Larry speaking perfect English and wearing clothing from 1996, all the adults in South Park chose to treat him as a prehistoric caveman who had lived millions of years ago. Dr. Mephisto examined the brand label on Larry's clothing more closely. He determined based on the Eddie Bauer brand and style that Larry had been frozen for approximately 32 months. This meant Larry had been frozen since the year 1996. Dr. Mephisto announced to the gathered press and officials that according to his scientific analysis, the Iceman was from 32 months ago. Despite this clear evidence that Larry was from recent times, Dr. Mephisto continued to treat and refer to him as a prehistoric Iceman. Creating the habitat. Dr. Mephisto decided to create a special habitat for Larry. He said the Iceman needed to live in an environment that matched his own time period. Dr. Mephisto constructed an enclosure that was designed to look like the year 1996. The habitat had furnishings and decorations from 1996. There was a television playing music videos from that era. The song All That She Wants by the pop group Ace of Base played in the background. There were posters on the walls from 1996. The habitat had a couch and a coffee table with magazines from that year. Dr. Mephisto decided to charge admission for people to view the prehistoric Iceman. He set up the habitat as a tourist attraction. Residents of South Park and visitors from outside the town paid money to observe Larry in his 1996 themed enclosure. Larry sat on the couch in the habitat looking confused and upset about his situation. Visitors stared at him through the glass walls of the enclosure. Federal agents arrived at Dr. Mephisto's laboratory. They said the government had an interest in the prehistoric Iceman. They wanted to make the display even more public and profitable. Dr. Mephisto agreed to work with the federal agents to maximize public exposure of Larry. Kenny's death. As Dr. Mephisto and the federal agents were transporting Larry's habitat to a new location, they used a moving walkway system. Kenny McCormick was standing near the moving walkway, watching the transport process. Kenny got too close to the machinery. His parka got caught in the moving walkway mechanism. Kenny was pulled into the machinery and crushed by the moving walkway components. Kenny died from this accident. Stan said, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Normally, Kyle would respond by saying, "You bastard," but Kyle did not say this. This was because Kyle was still angry at Stan about their argument over what to name the Iceman. Stan and Kyle's worsening argument. The conflict between Stan and Kyle continued to escalate. The two boys stopped speaking to each other except to argue about the frozen man's name. Stan insisted the name should be Gorak. Kyle insisted the name should be Steve. Neither boy would compromise or back down from his position. The argument spread beyond just the name. Stan and Kyle began fighting about who should have authority over the Iceman's well-being. Stan said he was the one who should decide what was best for Gorak. Kyle said he was the one who should decide what was best for Steve. The two boys, who were normally best friends, were now treating each other as enemies because of this disagreement. At one point, Stan and Kyle ended up in a direct confrontation. Stan said to Kyle, "You're a dick." Kyle responded by saying to Stan, "No, you're a dick." Stan said, "You're a dick." Kyle said, "You're a dick." This exchange continued with both boys calling each other the same insult repeatedly. This was a parody of a similar exchange between the characters Terrence and Philip in another South Park episode. Larry's life in the habitat. Inside his habitat, Larry tried to adjust to his situation. He watched the television that was provided for him. On the television screen, a news report announced that the Atlanta Falcons were going to the Super Bowl. This news sent Larry into a violent rage. Larry began smashing objects in his habitat and roaring like an animal. Dr. Mephisto and the observers watched this behavior through the glass. Dr. Mephisto said this demonstrated the Iceman's primitive nature and violent tendencies. Later, another program appeared on Larry's television. It was a music video by the performer Marilyn Manson. The music video showed Marilyn Manson performing a song. Larry watched this music video. The sight of Marilyn Manson sent Larry into another violent rage. He began destroying more objects in his habitat and screaming. This showed that certain aspects of 1999 culture were deeply disturbing to Larry, who had been frozen since 1996. The Australian Outback guy appeared at the habitat. He said he wanted to capture the prehistoric Iceman for his television program. The Australian Outback guy broke into Larry's enclosure. He said he was going to jam his thumb in the Iceman's butthole. Larry fled from the Australian Outback guy. The Australian Outback guy chased Larry through the habitat trying to assault him. The rescue attempt Stan decided that Larry, whom he called Gorak, needed to be rescued from this inhumane treatment. Stan went to Dr. Mephisto's facility at night to break Larry out of his habitat. Stan approached the habitat entrance with tools to break the lock. As Stan was working on the lock, Kyle arrived. Kyle said he was there to rescue Steve. Stan said he was rescuing Gorak. Kyle said the Iceman's name was Steve. Stan said his name was Gorak. Before Stan and Kyle could continue their argument, Kyle opened the habitat door. Larry saw the open door and immediately ran out to freedom. Larry thanked the boys. He said they had shown him the true meaning of friendship. He said they had put his happiness ahead of their own interests. Larry ran away from the facility before anyone could stop him. Larry's return home. Larry made his way back to his house in South Park. He had been frozen for 32 months, which meant he had been gone for almost 3 years. Larry arrived at his house and opened the front door. He called out for his wife, Leslie. Leslie appeared and stared at Larry in shock. Leslie said Larry's name in disbelief. Larry said he had come home. Leslie told Larry to leave. Larry asked why he should leave his own home. Leslie explained that Larry had been gone for a very long time. She said she had waited for him for a while, but eventually had to move on with her life. Larry looked around his house and saw evidence that another man was living there. There were men's shoes by the door that were not Larry's shoes. There were photographs on the wall showing Leslie with another man. Leslie admitted she had remarried. She said she had a new husband now. Larry was devastated by this news. Leslie's new husband appeared. He was holding a baby. Leslie said she also had 2 children now with her new husband. This meant that in the 32 months Larry had been frozen, his wife had divorced him, remarried, and had 2 children with her new husband. Larry left his former home heartbroken. He walked through the streets of South Park in the rain. He saw the world around him continuing without him. Everything had changed in the years he had been frozen. Larry decided he could not live in this world anymore. The chase and escape Larry decided he would freeze himself again. He walked back toward the mountains. He carried blocks of ice trying to freeze himself. The Australian Outback guy found Larry and resumed chasing him. The Australian Outback guy said he would capture the prehistoric Iceman. Larry ran from the Australian Outback guy. Kyle had a realization. He remembered that Larry needed somewhere to go where things were still like 1996. Kyle told Stan they needed to help Larry get to Des Moines, Iowa. Kyle explained that according to cultural understanding, everything in Des Moines was still like 1996. Stan initially misunderstood and said, "That's Frosty, you stupid butthole," thinking Kyle was referring to Frosty the snowman melting. Kyle clarified he meant Larry needed a place where time had not moved forward as quickly. Stan and Kyle went to the train station to help Larry. They found Larry being chased by the Australian Outback guy. The boys told Larry to get on the train to Des Moines. Larry ran toward the train. The Australian Outback guy tried to stop him. Larry made it onto the train. The train started moving. The Australian Outback guy jumped onto the moving train to continue pursuing Larry. He fought with Larry on top of the train cars. The train was moving at high speed. A helicopter appeared in the sky ahead of the train. The helicopter was hovering directly in the train's path. The train did not slow down. The train crashed into the helicopter. The impact derailed the train. The train cars separated and crashed in different directions. The Australian Outback guy was flung from the train toward the helicopter. The helicopter's spinning rotor blades chopped the Australian Outback guy into pieces. He was killed by the helicopter. Blades. Larry survived the crash. The helicopter had fallen to the ground but was largely intact. Larry climbed into the pilot's seat of the crashed helicopter. He figured out how to operate the controls. Larry started the helicopter and flew it away. The helicopter's tail number was A1U13. This was a reference to an animation inside joke from the California Institute of the Arts. Larry flew the helicopter to Des Moines, Iowa, where everything was still like 1996. He could live there in a place where he would not be considered behind the times. Stan and Kyle reconcile. After helping Larry escape, Stan and Kyle looked at each other. They realized their argument had been foolish. Stan said he was sorry for fighting with Kyle. Kyle said he was sorry too. Stan said it did not matter what they called the Iceman. Kyle agreed that their friendship was more important than the name argument. Stan and Kyle shook hands. Their friendship was restored. They walked back into town together as best friends again. Cartman's crocodile hunt. At the end of the episode, Cartman was still in the mountains looking for crocodiles. He had learned nothing from the events that had occurred. Cartman found a cow. He said he would stick his thumb in the cow's butthole, just like the Australian outback guy did to crocodiles. Cartman approached the cow from behind. He said, "Be very, very quiet. I'm hunting crocodiles. Ha 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 ha." This was a parody of the Looney Tunes character Elmer Fudd, who said, "Be viewy, viewy quiet. I'm hunting wobbits." Cartman attempted to stick his thumb in the cow's anus. The cow reacted by sitting down on Cartman. Cartman was crushed underneath the cow's body. He was stuck under the cow. The cow would not move. This was Cartman's punishment for trying to copy the Australian outback guy's abusive behavior toward animals. The importance of prehistoric Iceman to South Park lore. This episode is extremely important to South Park's timeline because it establishes several key facts about the show's universe. First, the episode reveals that the residents of South Park and its scientific community will treat recent history as prehistoric history when doing so serves their interests or desires for fame and profit. Dr. Mephisto knew from examining Larry's clothing that the man was only from 1996, yet Mephisto continued to present him as a prehistoric specimen for publicity and money. Second, the episode establishes that the town's willingness to ignore obvious truth in favor of sensational narratives is a fundamental characteristic of South Park's community. Every adult in the episode could hear Larry speaking perfect English and could see his modern Eddie Bauer clothing, yet they all chose to participate in the fiction that he was a caveman. Third, the episode demonstrates how Stan and Kyle's friendship can be tested by disagreements, but ultimately remain strong. The boys fought intensely over something trivial, but they were able to reconcile when they worked together to help someone in need. Fourth, the episode shows that time and culture move at different speeds in different parts of America. The solution to Larry's problem was to send him to Des Moines, Iowa, where, according to the episode's logic, cultural development was approximately 3 years behind the rest of the country. Fifth, the episode establishes Kenny's death as such a regular occurrence that other characters can temporarily take his role in the death ritual. When Kyle fell into the hole, Kenny got to say Kyle's signature line, "You bastard," showing the death ritual was more important than which specific character died. The episode reveals that South Park's earliest known prehistoric period is actually just 32 months before 1999, and this period is only considered prehistoric because the town's residents chose to treat it that way. This satirical approach to prehistory establishes that South Park's timeline is not bound by actual historical accuracy, but by the town's collective willingness to believe whatever narrative is most entertaining or profitable at any given moment. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 1700s, South Park's colonial era. According to the South Park timeline, there is a period during the 1770s when the American colonies were declaring independence from Great Britain. This era takes place in the year 1776 in Philadelphia. This time period is shown in the episode I'm a Little Bit Country from Season 7, which aired on the 9th of April 2003. This episode is incredibly important to South Park lore because it shows what the founding of America looked like and reveals how the nation's political divisions were established from the very beginning. The school assignment. The episode began in Mr. Garrison's 4th grade classroom at South Park Elementary. Mr. Garrison was teaching his students about current events. The United States had recently begun military action in Iraq. This was the Iraq War that started in March of 2003. Mr. Garrison explained that the country was divided about whether this war was right or wrong. Some people supported the war and some people protested against it. Mr. Garrison assigned his students homework. He told them to research what the Founding Fathers would have thought about the current war situation. Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Kenny McCormick, and Eric Cartman all received this assignment. The boys were required to create presentations about the opinions of America's founders regarding war and protest. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny decided they would study together to complete the assignment. They agreed to meet at the library to research the Founding Fathers and read history books. Cartman had a different idea. He said he did not want to study or read books. Cartman announced he would use a different research method. Cartman's flashback attempt Cartman went home to his house. He decided he would force himself to have a flashback to the year 1776. Cartman believed that if he could travel back in time mentally, he could experience the colonial era directly without needing to study. This would allow him to complete his homework assignment without doing any actual work. Cartman stood in his living room. He closed his eyes. He said out loud, "Say guys, 1776 was so long ago. I wonder what life would have been like back then. Back then. This was Cartman attempting to trigger a flashback using cliched, flashback-inducing dialogue that appears in television shows and movies. Cartman waited for the flashback to begin. Nothing happened. The flashback technique did not work. Cartman decided to try a different method. He went outside to his backyard. He picked up a large rock. Cartman lifted the rock above his own head. He dropped the heavy rock onto his skull. The rock struck Cartman's head with significant force. Cartman fell to the ground unconscious. He woke up a few moments later. Cartman looked around expecting to be in 1776. He was still in his backyard in the present day. The rock method had also failed to induce a flashback. The TiVo flashback method. Cartman developed a third plan to force a flashback to the colonial era. He went back inside his house and turned on his television. He had a TiVo device connected to his television. This was a device that could record television programs. Cartman set the TiVo to record content from the History Channel. He programmed it to record 50 hours of History Channel documentaries about colonial America and the year 1776. After the TiVo finished recording all the documentary content, Cartman took the TiVo device and carried it to his bathroom. He filled his bathtub with water. Cartman placed the TiVo device on the edge of the bathtub. He got into the bathtub fully clothed. Cartman plugged in the TiVo device. He held the TiVo device over the water. Cartman said he would now have a flashback to 1776. He dropped the plugged-in TiVo device into the bathtub water with himself. The electricity from the TiVo device electrocuted Cartman in the bathwater. Cartman's body convulsed from the electrical current. He screamed. The electrocution was severe. Cartman's mother, Leanne, heard the scream and came running to the bathroom. She found Cartman unconscious in the bathtub with the TiVo device. The water was smoking from the electrical discharge. Cartman hospitalized Leanne. Cartman called for an ambulance. Cartman was rushed to Hell's Pass Hospital. The doctors examined Cartman and determined he was in a coma. His brain had been severely affected by the electrical shock. The doctors told Leanne that Cartman might not wake up. They said his condition was very serious. Cartman lay in the hospital bed, unconscious and unresponsive. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny came to visit Cartman at the hospital. They looked at their friend lying in a coma. Kyle said he could not believe Cartman had electrocuted himself just to avoid doing homework. Stan said Cartman was an idiot. Kenny made a muffled comment through his parka. The boys left the hospital to continue working on their own homework assignment. The town divides. Meanwhile, the adults of South Park were becoming increasingly divided about the Iraq War. Two groups formed in the town. One group supported the war and believed America was right to take military action. The other group opposed the war and believed America should not be fighting. The two sides began arguing with each other in public. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, became the leader of the anti-war faction. Randy organized an anti-war protest. He made signs that said, "No war," and similar slogans. Randy gathered other South Park residents who opposed the war. They planned to hold a protest rally in the town center. Skeeter, a local bar patron, became the leader of the pro-war faction. Skeeter believed America should support its military and fight its enemies. He organized pro-war residents. They also planned a rally in the town center to show their support for the war. Both groups scheduled their rallies for the same day at the same time in the same location. Cartman arrives in 1776. While Cartman's body lay in a coma at the hospital, his mind traveled to the year 1776. Cartman found himself standing on a cobblestone street in Philadelphia. He looked around at the colonial buildings and people dressed in 18th century clothing. Cartman realized the electrocution method had worked. He had successfully induced a flashback to the colonial era. Cartman was excited about being in 1776. He walked down the street looking at the colonial surroundings. He saw men in tricorn hats and women in long dresses. There were horses pulling carriages. The buildings were made of brick and wood. Everything looked exactly like the colonial period from history books. Cartman began singing a song as he walked through Philadelphia. He sang, "In 1776, there was a lot of cool stuff happening in 1776. Cartman was pleased with himself for reaching the past. He said he would now learn what the Founding Fathers thought without having to read any books or study. Meeting the courier. As Cartman walked through colonial Philadelphia, he saw a man running down the street carrying an important-looking document. The man was a courier. He was running to deliver the document to Independence Hall, where the Continental Congress was meeting. Cartman asked the man what he was carrying. The courier said he was delivering the Declaration of Independence from Thomas Jefferson's home to the Congress. Cartman realized this was a very important historical moment. He thought about how he could learn what the Founding Fathers believed by being present at the Continental Congress. Cartman decided he needed to deliver the Declaration himself so he could be inside Independence Hall. Cartman looked around to make sure no one was watching. He pulled out a club. He approached the courier from behind. Cartman clubbed the courier over the head multiple times. As he beat the courier, Cartman sang the theme song from the television show Dawson's Creek. He sang, "I don't want to wait for our lives to be over." Cartman continued beating the courier with the club until the man was dead. Cartman took the Declaration of Independence document from the dead courier's hands. He now had the job of delivering it to Congress. The Continental Congress Cartman arrived at Independence Hall carrying the Declaration of Independence. He entered the building where the Founding Fathers were assembled. The room was filled with men in colonial clothing. These were the delegates to the Continental Congress. Cartman saw many famous historical figures. Thomas Jefferson was present. John Adams was there. Benjamin Franklin was in attendance. John Hancock, Stephen Hopkins, and John Dickinson were also among the delegates. Cartman approached Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. Cartman handed Jefferson the document. Jefferson thanked the young courier. Jefferson said they would now read the Declaration to all the delegates and vote on whether to declare independence from Great Britain. John Adams stood up to read the Declaration of Independence aloud to the assembled Congress. He read the famous words about all men being created equal and having unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He read about the grievances against King George III. He read the declaration that the colonies were now free and independent states. At the end of the document, Adams read a postscript that said, "P.S. Every Thursday should be free ice cream day." This was a joke showing that Jefferson had added silly things to the serious document. The Founding Fathers' debate after the Declaration was read. The delegates began debating whether they should declare independence. Some delegates supported the Declaration. Other delegates had concerns. The debate became heated. The delegates argued back and forth about what America should do. As the Founding Fathers debated, their arguments began to sound similar to the arguments happening in modern-day South Park about the Iraq War. Some delegates wanted to take aggressive military action. Other delegates wanted to avoid war and seek peaceful solutions. The debates in 1776 mirrored the debates in 2003. Benjamin Franklin stood up to speak. Franklin was voiced by television producer Norman Lear, who served as a creative consultant for this episode. Franklin said he had been thinking about the situation. He said he understood both sides of the argument. He proposed a solution to the conflict. Franklin's proposal. Benjamin Franklin explained his idea to the Continental Congress. He said that America needed to present two different faces to the world. America needed to appear strong and willing to fight its enemies. At the same time, America needed to appear peaceful and reasonable. Franklin said the way to accomplish both goals was for the country to say one thing and do another. Franklin elaborated on this concept. He said America would go to war when it believed war was necessary. At the same time, America would have protesters who opposed the war and demonstrated for peace. The rest of the world would see both the military action and the peace protests. This would show that America was both strong and democratic. The country could have its cake and eat it too. One delegate asked how this system would work. Franklin explained that some Americans would support wars and some Americans would protest wars. Both groups would exist simultaneously. The pro-war faction would ensure America could fight when needed. The anti-war faction would ensure America appeared to value peace and free speech. The two sides would argue with each other constantly, but this arguing was actually the system working as designed. The delegates of the Continental Congress agreed that Franklin's proposal was brilliant. They voted to adopt this approach. America would be founded on the principle of saying one thing and doing another. The nation would simultaneously support war and protest war. This was the American way, the modern rally. Back in modern-day South Park, the pro-war and anti-war rallies were both taking place in the town center. Randy Marsh led the anti-war protesters. They carried signs opposing the Iraq War. They chanted slogans about peace. Randy wore a tie-dyed shirt and headband to look like a stereotypical peace protester. He said they needed to rock for peace. Randy sang, "I like to rock, but I don't want to rock a rock." Skeeter led the pro-war faction. They carried American flags and signs supporting the troops. Skeeter wore a cowboy hat and spoke with country music phrasing. He said they needed to support America's military actions. Skeeter sang country music lyrics about standing behind the president and the armed forces. The two groups faced each other in the town center. They began arguing. The argument escalated into shouting. The shouting escalated into physical fighting. The pro-war and anti-war factions began brawling with each other. People were punching and kicking. The entire town was involved in the fight. The police had to intervene to stop the violence. Cartman returns. In the hospital, Cartman suddenly woke from his coma. He sat up in his hospital bed. The doctors were shocked. They said Cartman had been in a deep coma and they did not expect him to recover. Cartman said he had learned something very important. He said he needed to tell the town what the Founding Fathers believed. Cartman left the hospital and went to the town center where the pro-war and anti-war factions were still fighting. Cartman climbed onto a platform so everyone could see him. He shouted for everyone to stop fighting. The townspeople paused their brawling and looked at Cartman. They were curious what the boy who had been in a coma would say. Cartman announced that he had traveled back to 1776 and met the Founding Fathers. Stan said, "Oh, brother." Kyle said he could not believe they were listening to Cartman. Cartman continued his announcement. He said the Founding Fathers had a message for modern South Park. The message from the past Cartman explained what he had learned from Benjamin Franklin and the Continental Congress. He said the Founding Fathers wanted everyone to know that Americans could disagree with each other as much as they wanted. The important thing was that both sides agreed that America was a great country. The pro-war people and the anti-war people were both necessary parts of the American system. Cartman said the founders designed America to say one thing and do another. The country would go to war while simultaneously protesting war. Both actions would happen at the same time. This was not a flaw in the system. This was exactly how the system was supposed to work. The arguing between the two sides was healthy and normal. Randy Marsh and Skeeter looked at each other. They began to understand what Cartman was saying. Randy said he could support the troops even while protesting the war. Skeeter said he could support America's military strength while respecting the right to protest. The two men shook hands. The pro-war and anti-war factions stopped fighting. The celebration song. The townspeople began singing a song celebrating their new understanding. They sang the Donnie and Marie Osmond song, "A Little Bit Country, A Little Bit Rock and Roll." Randy sang the rock and roll parts about protesting and peace. Skeeter sang the country music parts about patriotism and military support. The two men sang together about how both perspectives were valid and necessary. During the song, the townspeople danced and celebrated. They sang about their differences and how those differences made America work. The song included a special lyric acknowledging that this was South Park's 100th episode. The townspeople sang, "For the war, against the war, who cares? 100 episodes." This was the show celebrating its milestone episode. The song concluded with everyone in town singing together. The pro-war faction and the anti-war faction had reconciled. They understood that both groups were necessary parts of the American system of saying one thing and doing another. The town was unified again despite their political differences. Stan and Kyle's presentation. After Cartman delivered his message about the Founding Fathers, Mr. Garrison asked Stan and Kyle about their homework presentation. Stan and Kyle admitted they had not completed their assignment. They explained they had been distracted by losing track of Cartman and Kenny. They said they also failed to account for daylight savings time. They said they had tried to find information in history books, but had not found anything useful. The townspeople who had gathered to hear the presentation began arguing again. Mr. Garrison was disappointed in Stan and Kyle, but then Cartman's message about the Founding Fathers had already resolved the conflict. The town did not need Stan and Kyle's presentation because Cartman had provided the answer through his flashback experience. Kyle looked at the situation in disbelief. He could not accept that Cartman had been the one to save the day and teach the town an important lesson. Kyle said, "I hate this town." This was Kyle's reaction to the fact that Cartman's ridiculous electrocution method had actually worked, and Cartman had become the hero of the episode. Production details. According to production information, the episode was written by series co-creator Trey Parker. The voice of Benjamin Franklin was provided by television legend Norman Lear. Norman Lear was the creator of famous television shows, including All in the Family, Sanford and Son, and The Jeffersons. Lear was on staff for South Park's 7th season and served as a creative consultant for this episode specifically. The flashback sequence was inspired by Norman Lear's practice of touring around schools with a copy of the Declaration of Independence. The creators of South Park incorporated this educational approach into their satirical episode about American politics. The song, "I'm a Little Bit Country, I'm a Little Bit Rock and Roll," was the classic Donnie and Marie Osmond song. The creators of South Park noticed that pro-Iraq war songs were performed by country music artists while anti-war songs were performed by rock musicians. This observation made them think of the Donnie and Marie song about being a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll. The entire episode was structured around securing the rights to use this song. The rights were not secured until the last possible moment before the episode aired. The importance of "I'm a Little Bit Country" to South Park lore. This episode establishes several crucial facts about South Park's timeline and the show's universe. First, the episode confirms that the standard timeline of American history exists in South Park's world. The year 1776 happened as documented in real history. The Founding Fathers, including Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and others, were real figures who signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. Second, the episode reveals that time travel, or at least mental time travel, through flashbacks is possible in South Park. Cartman successfully traveled back to Sedliolsk by electrocuting himself while his brain was filled with History Channel documentaries. This means consciousness can move through time in the South Park universe when subjected to extreme electrical shock combined with historical documentary content. Third, the episode establishes that South Park's version of American history includes satirical elements. The Declaration of Independence included a postscript about Free Ice Cream Day. Benjamin Franklin explicitly stated that America would be founded on the principle of hypocrisy and saying one thing while doing another. These humorous additions show that South Park's historical timeline is both accurate to real history and exaggerated for comedic effect. Fourth, the episode demonstrates that political divisions in modern South Park directly mirror political divisions from America's founding. The same arguments happening in 2003 about the Iraq War were happening in 1776 about independence and military action. This suggests that American political conflict is a permanent feature of the nation that was built into its foundation by the Founding Fathers' design. Fifth, the episode shows that Cartman is capable of extreme measures to avoid doing schoolwork. He was willing to risk death by electrocution rather than study or read books. This establishes Cartman's character as someone who will go to absurd lengths to take shortcuts, even when those shortcuts are more difficult and dangerous than simply doing the assigned work. The 1776 colonial period in South Park's timeline was characterized by the same political conflicts and debates that exist in modern times, revealing that America's system of simultaneously supporting and opposing its own actions was intentionally designed by the Founding Fathers as a method of national governance. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the boys' origins and childhood. Throughout South Park's run, the show has referenced the childhood of its main characters through flashback sequences. The boys' preschool years are documented in the episode Preschool from Season 8, which aired on the 10th of November, 2004. This episode provides crucial information about South Park lore because it shows Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick already established as a group during their preschool years, confirming they have known each other since early childhood. The present-day panic, the episode opened with Stan running through the halls of South Park Elementary. He was clearly panicked about something. Stan rounded a corner and saw Kyle and Kenny talking with Clyde Donovan near the lockers. Stan pulled Kyle and Kenny aside. He said he needed to talk to them immediately. Kyle asked Stan what the problem was. Stan's face showed genuine fear. Stan told them that Trent Boyette was being released from juvenile hall. He said Trent was getting out on parole. Kyle's expression changed to horror. Kenny made a muffled sound of distress through his parka. Both Kyle and Kenny recognized the name immediately. They understood why Stan was so frightened. Eric Cartman walked past the group. He asked what the problem was. His tone was dismissive. Cartman was not initially concerned about whatever had upset the other boys. Stan told Cartman that Trent Boyette was getting out of juvenile hall. Cartman's dismissive attitude vanished instantly. His face became pale. Cartman began panicking just like the other three boys. Kyle suggested that maybe Trent had forgiven them. He said they had only been in preschool when the incident happened. Stan said he did not think Trent would forgive them. Kenny made another muffled comment through his parka. The boys all agreed they were in serious danger. They needed to figure out how to protect themselves from Trent Boyette's revenge. Who was Trent Boyette? The boys explained through dialogue that Trent Boyette had been the toughest, baddest kid in their preschool class. Trent had been sent to juvenile hall 5 years earlier when the boys were in preschool. This meant the boys were currently in 4th grade. The incident that sent Trent to juvenile hall had occurred when they were approximately 4 or 5 years old. Trent had spent 5 years in juvenile detention because of what happened. The boys knew that Trent blamed them for his incarceration. They also knew that Trent would want revenge as soon as he was released. The boys were terrified because they remembered how tough Trent had been even as a preschooler. After 5 years in juvenile hall, Trent would be even more dangerous. Butters Stotch overheard the conversation. Butters also became frightened when he heard Trent's name. Butters had been involved in the incident from preschool. He was also on Trent's list of people who deserved revenge. The boys and Butters all shared the same fear about what would happen when Trent was released. The preschool flashback, the episode showed a flashback to 5 years earlier. The flashback depicted the boys during their preschool years at South Park Elementary. The preschool classroom had small chairs and tables sized for young children. There were art supplies and toys. The walls had alphabet letters and numbers posted on them. Miss Claridge was the preschool teacher. In the flashback, the boys were voiced by actual child actors instead of the regular adult voice actors. This was done to make the preschool versions sound authentically young. According to production information, the child actors did not actually say curse words. Instead, they said innocent words like big dummy, and the producers added bleeping sounds to make it seem like the children were swearing. Preschool Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were talking together in the classroom. They came up with an idea for a game to play. They wanted to play a game called Fireman. The game involved starting a real fire and then extinguishing it by urinating on it. The boys thought this would be fun and exciting. The boys discussed how they could play fireman. They needed someone to start the fire for them. They looked around the preschool classroom for someone who would be willing to light the fire. They spotted Trent Boyette. Trent was sitting alone at a table. Even as a preschooler, Trent looked tough and intimidating. Asking Trent for help, the 4 boys approached Trent Boyette. They asked if he would help them with their game. Trent asked what they wanted. The boys explained they were going to play fireman. They needed someone to start a fire so they could put it out. Trent asked how they planned to put out the fire. The boys said they would pee on it to extinguish the flames. Trent agreed to help them. He said he would start the fire. Trent pulled out a cigarette lighter from his pocket. This showed that even as a preschooler, Trent had access to dangerous items. Trent walked over to some paper materials in the classroom. He used the lighter to ignite the papers. The fire started small. The boys got excited. They prepared to put out the fire by urinating on it. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny all stood around the fire. They unzipped their pants. They urinated on the flames, but the fire did not go out. Instead, the fire spread. The flames grew larger. The boys' urine was not enough to extinguish the fire. The fire spreads. The fire continued to grow. It spread to other materials in the classroom. The flames climbed up curtains and caught on wooden furniture. The boys stopped urinating. They had run out of urine. They stared at the fire in horror. The fire was now out of control. Smoke filled the classroom. Miss Claridge noticed the fire. She rushed over to help. Miss Claridge tried to put out the flames. She used her hands to beat at the fire, but the fire was too strong. The flames suddenly engulfed Miss Claridge. She was covered in fire. Miss Claridge screamed. Her entire body was burning. The boys panicked. They did not know what to do. They ran toward Miss Claridge. They started urinating on their teacher to try to put out the flames on her body. But this did not work either. The fire continued to burn Miss Claridge. She collapsed to the floor. Other teachers heard the screams and came running. They pulled the fire alarm. The fire department was called. The aftermath firefighters and paramedics arrived at the preschool. They extinguished the fire in the classroom. They attended to Miss Claridge. Her injuries were severe. Miss Claridge had been burned over most of her body. The burns were third-degree burns. Her face was completely disfigured. Her body was horribly scarred. The paramedics loaded Miss Claridge onto a stretcher and took her to the hospital. Police officers arrived to investigate what had caused the fire. All the preschool children were gathered outside the building. The police questioned the children about what had happened. The officer asked if anyone knew how the fire started. The police officer specifically asked Trent Boyette what had happened. Trent explained that Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny had asked him to start a fire. Trent said the boys wanted to play fireman. Trent said he had only been helping them with their game. The police officer then turned to Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny to confirm Trent's story, blaming Trent. The four boys looked at each other. They realized they were in serious trouble. If they told the truth, they would be punished for causing the fire and for what happened to Miss Claridge. Cartman made a suggestion to the other boys. He said they should blame everything on Trent. The other boys hesitated, but then agreed with Cartman's plan. Stan told the police officer that Trent was lying. Kyle said Trent had started the fire on his own. Cartman said Trent was crazy and dangerous. Kenny made muffled statements through his parka, agreeing with the other boys. The four boys all denied having anything to do with the fire. They said Trent Boyette was solely responsible. The police officer asked if anyone else could confirm what really happened. Butters Stotch had witnessed the entire event. Butters knew the truth. The police officer asked Butters if he saw what happened. Butters looked at Trent and then at the other four boys. Butters was scared. He was afraid that if he told the truth, he would get in trouble with his parents. Butters said he did not want to get involved. He refused to say what he had seen. The police officer took Butters' refusal to speak as evidence that he had nothing useful to contribute. Without Butters' testimony, Trent had no one to defend him. The police believed Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny because there were four of them all telling the same story. Trent sentenced. The police arrested Trent Boyette. Trent was charged with arson and with causing grievous bodily harm to Miss Claridge. Even though Trent was only a preschooler, he was sent to juvenile detention. The judge sentenced Trent to 5 years in juvenile hall. This was an extremely long sentence for such a young child. As Trent was being taken away by the police, he looked at Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny, and Butters. Trent said he would remember what they did to him. He said he would get revenge when he was released. The boys watched Trent being put into the police car. The flashback showed the police car driving away with Trent inside. The flashback ended and returned to the present day. The boys were now in 4th grade. 5 years had passed since Trent was sent to juvenile hall. During those 5 years, the boys had continued their lives normally. They went to school. They had adventures. They made friends. They forgot about Trent Boyette and what they had done to him. Miss Claridge's condition. The episode revealed what had happened to Miss Claridge after the fire. She had survived, but her injuries were catastrophic. Miss Claridge was now confined to a specialized motorized wheelchair. The wheelchair was similar to the one used by Captain Christopher Pike in the Star Trek television series. Miss Claridge's body was completely immobile. She could not move or speak. The only way Miss Claridge could communicate was through electronic beeping sounds. She would beep once to indicate yes, and beep twice to indicate no. This was the only method she had to express herself. Miss Claridge spent all her time in her wheelchair, connected to life support equipment. She required constant medical care. She could never leave the wheelchair or live independently again. Miss Claridge still worked at South Park Elementary despite her severe disabilities. She attended school events and was present at various functions. The students and staff had become accustomed to her condition. Most people had accepted that Miss Claridge would never recover from the injuries she sustained in the preschool fire 5 years earlier. The boys' defense plan back in the present day, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny, and Butters met to discuss how they would protect themselves from Trent. Stan said they needed some kind of protection. Cartman immediately suggested they get condoms. This was Cartman misunderstanding what Stan meant by protection. Kyle told Cartman that was not the kind of protection Stan was talking about. The boys decided they needed physical protection from Trent's attacks. They considered various options. Someone suggested they ask the 6th graders for help. The 6th graders were the toughest kids at South Park Elementary. If anyone could protect them from Trent, it would be the 6th graders. The boys went to find the 6th graders. They located a group of 6th grade boys at a location the older kids used for hanging out. Stan explained their situation to the 6th graders. He told them that Trent Boyette was being released from juvenile hall and would be coming after them. The boys asked if the 6th graders would protect them. 6th graders refuse. The 6th graders knew who Trent Boyette was. They had heard stories about how tough Trent had been before he was sent away. The 6th graders were actually afraid of Trent. One 6th grader said he remembered Trent from 5 years ago. He said Trent had been the toughest kid in preschool. After 5 years in juvenile hall, Trent would be even more dangerous. The 6th graders refused to help Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny, and Butters. The older boys said they wanted nothing to do with Trent Boyette. They told the younger boys they were on their own. The 6th graders walked away. This meant the boys had no protection from Trent's inevitable revenge. The boys were devastated. If even the 6th graders were too afraid to help them, they had no hope of surviving Trent's wrath. They needed to come up with a different plan. Someone suggested they try to frame someone else for the preschool fire, so Trent would blame that person instead of them. This led to various failed schemes throughout the episode. Butters becomes the first victim. Butters was at home with his parents. His parents told him to go outside and play. Butters said he did not want to go outside. He explained that Trent Boyette was out of juvenile hall and wanted to hurt him. Butters' parents did not believe him. Stephen and Linda Stotch thought Butters was making excuses. They forced Butters to go outside. Butters reluctantly went outside to play. He stood in his front yard looking around nervously. Trent Boyette appeared. Trent walked up to Butters. He said he had been waiting 5 years for this moment. Butters tried to explain that he was sorry for not defending Trent. He said he had been scared. Trent said it was too late for apologies. Trent proceeded to attack Butters using various childhood pranks and torments. The attack happened off-screen. Later, Butters was shown being rushed to the hospital. A doctor examined Butters and read off his injuries. Butters had sustained a Snuggie, 2 Indian sunburns, a Charlie horse, a second-degree titty twister, a colossal swirly, a noogie, and something called a Polish bike ride. The doctor said the Polish bike ride had no cure. The final confrontation. The boys realized they could not hide from Trent forever. They decided to try one last plan. They would go to Miss Claridge and ask her to tell the police the truth about what happened 5 years ago. If Miss Claridge confirmed that they had asked Trent to start the fire, Trent might be freed from his wrongful imprisonment and might forgive them. The boys went to visit Miss Claridge. They explained their situation to her. They asked if she would tell the police that the fire had been their fault, not Trent's. The boys waited for Miss Claridge to respond using her beeping system. Miss Claridge beeped twice. This meant no. She refused to help them. Trent Boyette found the boys. He confronted them about what they had done. Trent said they had stolen 5 years of his life. He said they had taken away his childhood. While Trent was locked up, the boys had adventures, they had fun, they had experiences that Trent could never have. Trent referenced specific adventures from previous South Park episodes, including meeting Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, fighting Mecha Streisand and traveling to Afghanistan. Trent said he was going to make them pay for everything they had taken from him. The boys tried to run. Trent chased them. A confrontation occurred. During the chaos, fire started again. This fire was similar to the fire from the preschool incident 5 years earlier. The fire department arrived. The police arrived. In the confusion, the boys once again blamed Trent for starting the fire. Trent arrested. Again, the police arrested Trent Boyette for the second time. Trent was taken back into custody. He was sentenced to another 5 years in juvenile detention. As Trent was being taken away, he yelled at the boys. He said he would be back in 5 years. He said he would get his revenge then. The boys watched the police car drive away with Trent inside. After Trent was gone, the boys celebrated. They performed a victory dance. They were relieved that they had another 5 years before they needed to worry about Trent's revenge. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny all danced in the exact same way. They were happy they had escaped Trent's vengeance once again. The episode ended with the boys walking away together. They had successfully avoided taking responsibility for their actions twice. They had framed Trent for 2 fires instead of 1. Trent would now spend 10 years total in juvenile detention because of the boys' deception. The boys showed no remorse for what they had done to Trent or to Miss Claridge. Production details and voice acting. According to production information, the preschool flashback sequences use child voice actors to make the young versions of the characters sound authentic. Dante Alexander provided the voice of young Stan Marsh in the flashback scenes. Skylar James Sandak provided the voice of young Butters Stotch. Other children were used for the voices of young Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. The production team made a specific decision about the language in the flashback scenes. Trey Parker and Matt Stone did not want to have real children saying actual profanity. Instead, the child actors said innocent words and phrases. The producers then added bleeping sounds over the innocent dialogue. This created the impression that the preschool children were saying offensive words without actually having children curse. This technique allowed the episode to maintain South Park's adult humor while protecting the child actors. Trey Parker later stated in interviews that he had to reassure his own mother that they were not making children swear on the show. The bleeping was added in post-production to dialogue that was completely innocent. The significance to South Park's timeline, preschool reveals important information about the origins of the main character's friendship. The episode confirms that Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny have known each other since preschool. They were already a group when they were approximately 4 or 5 years old. This means their friendship extends back to the earliest years of their childhood. The episode establishes that the boys' personalities were already formed during preschool. Cartman was already manipulative and willing to lie to avoid consequences. Stan was already willing to follow along with bad ideas. Kyle was already conflicted between doing the right thing and protecting himself. Kenny was already present but largely silent. These core personality traits have remained consistent from preschool through 4th grade. The episode also reveals that Butters has been associated with the main 4 boys since preschool. Butters was present during the fire incident and was complicit in framing Trent. This shows Butters' long-standing relationship with the main characters, even though he is not officially part of their core group. The episode demonstrates that the boys have been causing chaos and avoiding responsibility for their actions since their earliest childhood. The pattern of the boys causing problems, blaming others, and escaping consequences has existed throughout their entire lives. This pattern continues in present-day South Park, where the boys regularly cause disasters and rarely face lasting punishment. Most significantly, the episode shows that the boys are capable of maintaining a collective lie for 5 years. They never confessed to their role in the preschool fire. They never showed guilt or remorse. They were willing to send an innocent child to juvenile detention twice rather than accept responsibility. This reveals a dark aspect of their friendship. Their loyalty to each other includes covering up their crimes and protecting each other from consequences, regardless of who gets hurt. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the establishment of present-day South Park. The modern era of South Park begins with the series premiere, that introduced the town and its inhabitants to television audiences. Cartman Gets an Anal Probe from Season 1 aired on the 13th of August, 1997. This episode marks the official start of the South Park timeline as viewers know it. The episode establishes the main characters, the town setting, and the core dynamics that would define the series for decades to come. The Bus Stop Morning. The episode opened at the school bus stop in South Park, Colorado. This location would become the standard opening setting for many South Park episodes. 4 boys were standing together waiting for their school bus to arrive. These were Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. The boys were dressed in winter clothing appropriate for the cold Colorado mountain climate. Eric Cartman was telling the other boys about a dream he had the previous night. Cartman said he dreamed that alien visitors came and abducted him. In the dream, the aliens took Cartman aboard their spacecraft. The aliens performed experiments on Cartman. Specifically, the aliens gave Cartman an anal probe. Cartman described the details of this dream to Stan, Kyle, and Kenny. Kyle told Cartman it was not a dream. Kyle said the alien abduction actually happened. Stan agreed with Kyle. Stan said Cartman really was abducted by aliens. Kenny made muffled comments through his orange parka, confirming what Stan and Kyle were saying. Cartman refused to believe them. He insisted it was just a nightmare. Cartman said that other boys were trying to scare him. Kyle noticed his younger brother Ike standing near the bus stop. Kyle called to Ike. Ike was a very young child, approximately 2 or 3 years old. Kyle said they should play a game. The game was called Kick the Baby. Kyle told Ike to get ready. Ike positioned himself for the game. Kyle took a running start and kicked Ike like a football. Ike went flying through the air and landed in a snowbank far away. Kyle laughed. This established that Kick the Baby was a regular game Kyle played with his adopted brother. Chef arrives. A vehicle pulled up near the bus stop. The driver was Jerome McElroy, known to everyone as Chef. Chef worked as the cafeteria cook at South Park Elementary. Chef rolled down his window. He asked the boys if they had seen any alien visitors last night. This question startled Cartman. Chef was inadvertently confirming that aliens had actually been in South Park. Chef was wearing a t-shirt with a picture of an alien on the back. The shirt had the word "Believe" printed. On it, Cartman saw the shirt and became more frightened. Chef drove away to continue his morning activities. The boys watched him leave. The school bus arrived at the bus stop. The bus driver was a woman named Ms. Crabtree. This was her first appearance in the series. Ms. Crabtree was an elderly woman with a large growth or tumor on her face. She shouted at the children to get on the bus. Her manner was aggressive and unfriendly. The boys climbed aboard the school bus. On the bus inside the school bus were other children from South Park. The boys found seats. Kyle sat near a window. Kyle looked out the back window of the bus as it drove away from the bus stop. Kyle saw something that horrified him. Alien visitors were at the bus stop. The aliens were taking Ike. Kyle watched as his baby brother was abducted by the extraterrestrial beings. Kyle shouted that the aliens had taken Ike. He told the other boys they needed to stop the bus and rescue his brother. Stan said they should tell Ms. Crabtree to turn around. Kyle called out to Ms. Crabtree. He said aliens took his baby brother and they needed to go back. Ms. Crabtree told Kyle to sit down and be quiet. She refused to stop the bus or turn around. Cartman said Kyle was overreacting. Cartman said there were no such things as aliens or visitors. Kyle insisted he had seen the aliens take Ike. The bus continued driving toward South Park Elementary. Kyle was distressed about his brother being kidnapped but could do nothing while on the bus. Arriving at school. The school bus arrived at South Park Elementary. This was the elementary school that all the main characters attended. The building was a typical small-town school. The children exited the bus and entered the school building. They went to their classroom for the start of the school day. The boys' teacher was Mr. Garrison. This was Herbert Garrison, who taught 3rd grade. Mr. Garrison stood at the front of the classroom. He had a hand puppet named Mr. Hat. Mr. Garrison treated Mr. Hat as if the puppet were a separate person with its own thoughts and opinions. Mr. Garrison frequently had conversations with Mr. Hat during class. Other students were visible in the classroom. One student was Wendy Testaberger. Wendy was a girl with long black hair who wore a purple jacket. Another student was Pip Pirrip. Pip was a blond boy who spoke with a British accent. The classroom had typical elementary school decorations, including educational posters and a chalkboard. Classroom incident. Kyle raised his hand. He asked Mr. Garrison if he could be excused from school. Kyle explained that he needed to find his baby brother Ike because aliens had kidnapped him. Mr. Garrison responded by saying Kyle needed to ask permission from Mr. Hat. Kyle asked Mr. Hat if he could be excused. Mr. Hat and Mr. Garrison both responded together by saying, "You go to hell, and you die." This was the first appearance of this catchphrase that Mr. Garrison and Mr. Hat would use repeatedly throughout the series. Cartman laughed at Kyle being told to go to hell. As Cartman laughed, he suddenly farted. The fart was not a normal fart. Fire shot out from Cartman's rear end. The flame hit Pip Pirrip and burned him. This was evidence that something unusual had happened to Cartman. The anal probe the aliens had implanted was causing Cartman to emit fire from his body. Lunch at the cafeteria. The class period ended. The students went to the cafeteria for lunch. The boys stood in line waiting to receive their food. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny moved forward in the lunch line. Cartman continued to fart fire periodically. The fire was shooting out from his pants. Wendy Testaberger approached Stan in the lunch line. Cartman noticed Wendy walking toward them. Cartman said that Wendy was the girl Stan wanted to kiss. Stan became nervous when Wendy got close to him. Stan's face turned slightly green. Stan suddenly vomited. The vomit shot out of Stan's mouth and landed on Wendy. Wendy was covered in Stan's vomit. This established a running pattern that would appear throughout the series. Whenever Stan was near Wendy or thought about his feelings for her, he would vomit uncontrollably. Despite being vomited on, Wendy was not angry. She handed Stan a note. The note asked Stan to meet her at Stark's Pond after school. Stark's Pond was a location in South Park where children often gathered. Meeting Chef. The boys reached the front of the lunch line. Chef was serving food from behind the cafeteria counter. Chef greeted the boys. Kyle told Chef about his problem. Kyle said his brother had been kidnapped by aliens, but nobody believed him. Kyle asked Chef what to do when people do not believe you about something important. Chef asked the boys to confirm what they just said. The boys explained that alien visitors had abducted Kyle's baby brother Ike. Chef became very upset. Chef said, "What the hell do you think you were doing in school, eating Salisbury steak? Go find him, damn it." Chef was confirming that alien visitors were real and that the boys needed to rescue Ike immediately. At that moment, a mechanical device emerged from Cartman's rear end. The device was a robot with a single large eye. This was the anal probe that the aliens had implanted in Cartman during his abduction. The probe extended upward from inside Cartman's body. It looked around the cafeteria, then it quickly retracted back inside Cartman. The boys all saw this happen. This was proof that Cartman really had been abducted by aliens. The fire alarm chef decided to help the boys escape from school. He pulled the fire alarm in the cafeteria. The alarm began ringing loudly throughout the building. All the students and teachers evacuated the school building according to fire safety procedures. The boys used this opportunity to leave school grounds and search for Ike. The boys walked through South Park looking for any sign of the aliens or Ike. Cartman was still insisting that he had not been abducted by aliens. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the sky. The beam hit Cartman directly. Cartman began singing an old song called "I Love to Singa." Cartman sang and danced while the beam controlled him. This was further evidence that aliens were controlling Cartman through the probe they had implanted. Kenny's first death. The boys continued searching for the aliens. A large spaceship appeared in the sky above them. The spaceship was the aliens' vessel. Kyle called up to the spaceship. He demanded that the aliens return his brother Ike. The spaceship responded by firing a weapon. A star-shaped beam shot out from the spaceship. The beam struck Kenny McCormick. Kenny was hit by the alien weapon. He fell to the ground. Stan said, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny?" Kyle responded by saying, "You bastards." This was the first time these famous lines were spoken in the series. Kenny lay dead on the ground. The other boys continued with their mission despite Kenny's death. Officer Barbrady and the cows elsewhere in South Park Officer Barbrady was investigating strange occurrences. Officer Barbrady was the sole police officer in South Park. He was not very intelligent and often misunderstood situations. A farmer had reported that his cows were being mutilated. The farmer believed aliens were responsible. Officer Barbrady did not believe in aliens. He dismissed the farmer's concerns. The aliens were indeed responsible for the cow mutilations. However, the mutilations were accidental. The aliens were attempting to communicate with cows. According to the aliens, cows were the most intelligent and respectable life form on Earth. The aliens respected cows more than humans. The mutilations occurred because some of the less experienced aliens made mistakes while trying to talk to the cows. Stan and Wendy's meeting. Stan decided he needed to go meet Wendy at Stark's Pond, as she had requested. Kyle decided to accompany Stan. They walked to Stark's Pond together. Wendy was waiting there. She was happy to see Stan despite him having vomited on her earlier. Kyle explained their problem to Wendy. He said they needed to rescue Ike from the aliens. Wendy had an idea. She suggested they use Cartman as bait to lure the aliens back to Earth. Since Cartman had the alien probe inside him, the aliens would be attracted to Cartman's location. The boys agreed this was a good plan. They went to find Cartman. The rescue plan. The boys located Cartman. They convinced him to help them even though Cartman did not want to be involved. The boys took Cartman to an open area. They tied Cartman to a tree with rope. Cartman protested that this was not necessary. The boys ignored his complaints. The anal probe inside Cartman suddenly activated. A massive satellite dish emerged from Cartman's anus. The satellite dish extended 80 feet into the air. This was the device the aliens used to track Cartman and receive signals from Earth. The emergence of the giant satellite dish was visible from space. The alien spaceship detected the signal from Cartman's anal probe. The spaceship descended from orbit and approached the location where Cartman was tied to the tree. A hatch opened on the side of the spaceship. Ike appeared in the hatch opening. Ike jumped down from the spacecraft. He landed in a snowbank. Kyle ran over and grabbed Ike. Kyle had successfully rescued his brother, the aliens and the cows. The alien spaceship landed near a herd of cows. The aliens exited their spacecraft. They approached the cows. The aliens began having a conversation with the cows. The conversation was shown with subtitles translating both the alien language and the cows mooing. The aliens told the cows that of all life forms on Earth, the aliens respected cows the most. The aliens said cows were the most evolved and intelligent species on the planet. The aliens gave the cows a mysterious device. The device appeared to be some kind of advanced technology. The aliens told the cows to use the device wisely. The cows accepted the gift. After completing their communication with the cows, the aliens returned to their spaceship. The spaceship began to lift off. Before leaving Earth, the aliens used a tractor beam to pull Cartman into the spacecraft. Cartman screamed as he was lifted off the ground. He flew up into the alien ship. The spaceship departed Earth and returned to space. Resolution and Kenny's status. Stan and Wendy had a moment together at the end of the rescue mission. They seemed to be getting along well. They appeared ready to have a romantic moment. Stan leaned toward Wendy, but then Stan vomited on Wendy again. Despite being covered in vomit for the second time that day, Wendy was not upset. She looked at the contents of Stan's vomit and found them interesting. The two bonded over examining what Stan had eaten. Kenny's body remained dead throughout the rest of the episode. In the original, unaired, pilot version of the episode, Kenny returned at the end alive and well. However, in the version that aired on television, Kenny stayed dead. This established the pattern that Kenny would die in almost every episode of the early seasons and would return alive in the next episode without explanation. The episode ended with the boys having survived their first major adventure together. They had encountered aliens, rescued Ike, witnessed Kenny's death, and established the core dynamics that would carry through the series. Production and animation. Details. According to production information, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe was animated using construction paper cutout stop-motion animation. Trey Parker and Matt Stone created hundreds of paper cutouts for the characters. They photographed each individual frame with an overhead camera. This process took 3 months to complete. The original pilot was 28 minutes long, which was too long for a television time slot that needed to include commercials. Parker and Stone cut approximately 10 minutes of material from the pilot. They added back 3 minutes of new material created using computer animation. This brought the episode to the standard 22-minute runtime. The additions included the scene where the 80-foot satellite dish emerges from Cartman's anus. This scene used computer animation rather than paper cutouts. After the pilot episode, South Park switched entirely to computer animation. The computer animation was designed to look exactly like the paper cutout style. This allowed the show to maintain its distinctive visual appearance while dramatically reducing production time. Later episodes could be created in approximately 1 week rather than 3 months. Character establishments. Through the pilot, Cartman gets an anal probe, introduced all 4 main characters, and established their core personality traits. Eric Cartman was shown to be self-centered and in denial about obvious facts. He refused to believe in the alien abduction despite overwhelming evidence. Stan Marsh was portrayed as relatively normal, but with the unusual trait of vomiting when near his crush. Kyle Broflovsky was established as having a strong sense of family responsibility, as shown by his determination to rescue Ike. Kenny McCormick was established as the character who dies frequently, and his muffled speech through his parka made him difficult to understand. Supporting characters were introduced, including Mr. Garrison and his hand puppet, Mr. Hat, who served as the boys' teacher. Chef appeared as a source of wisdom and help for the children, despite being an adult who spoke inappropriately about sexual topics. Officer Barb Brady represented law enforcement in South Park and was established as incompetent. Ms. Crabtree drove the school bus and was shown to be mean to the children. The episode established South Park Elementary as the school all the children attended. The town of South Park itself was established as a small mountain community in Colorado. The surrounding mountains and wilderness areas became important settings. Stark's Pond was introduced as a location where children gathered. These locations would reappear throughout the series. The episode revealed South Park's present-day timeline as contemporary with its 1997 air date, establishing a world where modern suburban American life collided with bizarre, supernatural, and science fiction elements, all filtered through the perspective of foul-mouthed elementary school children navigating their ordinary lives in an extraordinarily strange town. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to major timeline events. Several episodes throughout South Park's run have revealed significant information about the show's characters and world that permanently altered the series' continuity. These episodes built upon each other to create a deeper mythology beneath the show's surface-level comedy. Kenny's immortality revealed for the first 5 seasons. Of South Park, Kenny McCormick died in nearly every episode. Stan would say, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and Kyle would respond, "You bastards." The next episode would begin with Kenny alive again without explanation. This pattern continued until Season 14 provided the explanation for Kenny's recurring deaths and resurrections. The explanation came through a 3-episode story arc that aired during Season 14. The arc consisted of 3 episodes. The first was Coon 2 Hindsight, which aired on the 27th of October 2010. The second was Mysterian Rises, which aired on the 3rd of November 2010. The third was Coon vs. Coon and Friends, which aired on the 10th of November 2010. These 3 episodes formed what became known as the Coon Trilogy or the Mysterian Trilogy. The story began with the boys playing superheroes. Cartman created a superhero persona called the Coon. The Coon was based on comic book characters like Batman. Cartman designed a costume with a raccoon theme. Other children in South Park also created superhero identities. They formed a superhero team called Coon and Friends. The team included Toolshed, Human Kite, Iron Maiden, Tupperware, and Mosquito. These were the superhero alter egos of Stan, Kyle, Kenny, Token, and Clyde. One superhero stood apart from the others. This was Mysterian. Mysterian wore a cape and hood that obscured his face. His identity was kept secret from the audience for multiple episodes. Mysterian first appeared in an earlier episode from Season 13 called The Coon. In that episode, Mysterian's true identity was left ambiguous. The townspeople recognized Mysterian immediately, but viewers could not tell which character was behind the mask. Mysterian's identity. During the events of the Mysterian trilogy, Cartman as the Coon became increasingly angry about not being the center of attention. The other children kicked Cartman out of Coon and Friends because of his bad behavior. Mysterian took over leadership of the superhero group. This made Cartman furious. He wanted revenge on Mysterian and Coon and Friends. A villain named Captain Hindsight appeared in the story. Captain Hindsight had the ability to provide perfect hindsight about any situation. He could always explain what people should have done differently after something went wrong. Captain Hindsight became famous, and the town loved him. Cartman tried to blackmail Captain Hindsight with fake photographs. Mysterian confronted Captain Hindsight about the blackmail. Captain Hindsight said his power of perfect hindsight was a curse. He complained about how difficult it was to always know what should have been done. Mysterion responded by revealing his own curse. Mysterion said Captain Hindsight's complaints were nothing compared to what Mysterion dealt with every day. Mysterion explained his superpower. He said he could not die. Mysterion said he had experienced death countless times. Sometimes he saw a bright light when he died. Sometimes he saw heaven. Sometimes he saw hell. But no matter what, Mysterion always woke up in his bed the next morning wearing his same clothes. He said the worst part was that nobody remembered him dying. He would go to school the next day and everyone would greet him normally as if nothing had happened. Even people who had watched him die would have no memory of it. Mysterion told Captain Hindsight to pull the trigger if he did not believe him. Mysterion was holding a gun to his own head. He dared Captain Hindsight to shoot him. The other members of Coon and Friends watched in horror. Human Kite, who was Kyle's superhero identity, accidentally called out Mysterion's real name. He said Kenny. This revealed to viewers that Mysterion was Kenny McCormick. Testing his immortality. After this revelation, Kenny continued to demonstrate his immortality throughout the trilogy. Kenny shot himself in the head to prove to his friends that he could not die. He pulled the trigger and his body fell to the ground. The next scene showed Kenny waking up in his bed. He was completely unharmed. His friends came to his house. They asked Kenny why he had run away from them during their mission. They had no memory of seeing Kenny shoot himself and die. Kenny realized his friends genuinely could not remember his deaths. He tried multiple times to make them remember. Later in the trilogy, Kenny died by being stabbed. Kyle shouted, "You bastards!" in reaction to seeing Kenny stabbed. This was Kyle's automatic response to Kenny's death. But by the next scene, Kyle had completely forgotten Kenny died. Kenny woke up in his bed again. His friends showed up and acted as if nothing had happened. Kenny became frustrated with this curse. He explained to his friends that his immortality was not cool or fun. He said it hurt every single time he died. Kyle said he thought immortality would be pretty cool. Kenny responded angrily. He said, "It's not pretty cool, Kyle. It fucking hurts." Kenny said he experienced the full pain of every death. The pain was real, the fear was real, the trauma was real, but nobody else could remember or acknowledge what he went through. The parents in Cthulhu. Kenny wanted to understand why he had this power. Mysterion went to his parents' house to question them. Kenny's parents were Stuart and Carol McCormick. They lived in poverty. Their house was small and poorly maintained. Kenny confronted them while wearing his Mysterion costume. He asked them about a cult. The other members of Coon and Friends had discovered information about a cult dedicated to Cthulhu. Cthulhu was an elder god from horror fiction. The cult worshipped this dark deity. Kenny's parents had been members of this cult 10 years earlier. This meant they joined the cult before Kenny was born. Kenny asked his parents why they joined the cult of Cthulhu. His parents said they only went to the cult meetings for the free beer. They said the cult meetings had free alcohol and they wanted to get drunk. They did not actually worship Cthulhu or believe in the cult's teachings. They just attended for the drinks. This casual explanation of why they joined a dark cult was typical of Kenny's parents, who were portrayed as irresponsible and neglectful. During the cult meeting that Kenny's parents attended, something happened that cursed their future son with immortality. The exact mechanism was not fully explained. The cult had a saying. They would chant, "That is not dead which can eternal lie," and with strange aeons even death may die. This phrase related to Cthulhu mythology, Whatever ritual or curse occurred during those meetings caused Kenny to be born with the inability to stay dead. The rebirth process. The final episode of the trilogy showed what happened after Kenny died. Kenny died during the episode's climax. The scene then cut to Kenny's parents in their bed. Carol McCormick woke up in panic. She said to her husband, "It's happening again." Carol went into labor. She gave birth right there in the bed. The baby she gave birth to was Kenny. The infant was already wearing Kenny's orange parka. Stuart picked up the baby Kenny. He placed the infant in Kenny's bed. The baby immediately grew to Kenny's normal age. Within moments, Kenny was back to being an 8 or 9-year-old boy. He was wearing his regular clothes and looked exactly as he had before dying. Carol said to Stuart, "We never should have gone to those stupid cult meetings." This confirmed that the cult of Cthulhu was responsible for Kenny's immortality curse. This scene explained what happened every time Kenny died throughout the series. Kenny's mother gave birth to him again. The new Kenny retained all the memories and experiences of the previous Kenny. He was not a different person. He was the same Kenny, reborn in a new body, but the rest of the world had no memory of the previous Kenny dying. Time seemed to reset for everyone except Kenny himself. Earlier hints about Kenny's deaths. The Mysterian Trilogy was not the first time the show addressed Kenny's deaths. An earlier episode from Season 4 had provided a hint about the rebirth process. This was the episode Cartman Joins Nambla, which aired in 2000. In that episode, Kenny's parents decided to have another baby. Kenny did not want a younger sibling. He tried to prevent the pregnancy. At the end of that episode, Kenny died. He was run over by an ambulance. Immediately after Kenny's death, Carol gave birth. The baby looked exactly like Kenny and was wearing an orange parka. Stuart said, "God, this must be the 50th time this has happened." Carol corrected him and said 52nd. This was a joke showing that Kenny had died and been reborn 52 times by that point in the series. At the time this episode aired in 2000, viewers assumed it was just a throwaway gag. The show frequently made jokes about Kenny's deaths without explaining them seriously. But the Mysterian Trilogy in 2010 revealed that the Cartman Joins Nambla episode had actually been foreshadowing the true explanation. Kenny really was being reborn by his mother each time he died. The 50th or 52nd time was not an exaggeration. It was the literal truth. Why Kenny stopped dying. Kenny died in almost every episode during seasons 1 through 5. In season 6, Kenny was killed off permanently. He remained dead for most of season 6. The show explained this by having Kenny die from a terminal illness rather than an accident. Kenny's soul briefly possessed Cartman's body. Eventually, Kenny returned in the season 6 finale Red Sleigh Down. After his return, Kenny died much less frequently. According to Trey Parker and Matt Stone in interviews, they stopped killing Kenny in every episode because they got tired of the gag. They felt the recurring death joke had become repetitive and predictable. They also felt that Kenny's inability to speak clearly through his parka limited his development as a character. By keeping Kenny alive more often and giving him more dialogue, they could develop his personality beyond just being the character who dies. The Mysterian Trilogy allowed the show to address Kenny's deaths seriously, while also explaining why the deaths became less frequent. After Kenny himself became aware of his curse and expressed how much he hated it, the show could not continue killing him in every episode without it feeling cruel. The revelation that Kenny experienced real pain and trauma from each death added emotional weight that made the running gag less funny. Cartman's father mystery. Another major revelation in South Park's timeline involved the identity of Eric Cartman's father. This mystery was built up over multiple episodes in the show's early seasons. The mystery began in season 1 with a 2-part episode. The first part was Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, which aired in 1998. The second part was Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, which aired in 1998. These episodes were the season 1 and season 2 finales, respectively. In these episodes, Cartman wanted to know who his father was. The show revealed that Cartman's mother, Leanne, had been sexually active with many men in South Park. Nearly every adult male in town was a potential candidate for being Cartman's biological father. The show built up suspense about which man was the father. The season 1 finale ended on a cliffhanger. When Season 2 began, the resolution was delayed. The premiere episode was about Terrence and Philip instead of resolving Cartman's father mystery. This made viewers angry because they wanted to know the answer. Finally, the second episode of Season 2 revealed that Leanne Cartman was actually Cartman's father. This was possible because Leanne was hermaphroditic. The show claimed she had both male and female anatomy. However, this answer was later retconned. The show changed the explanation in later episodes. The true identity of Cartman's father was revealed in the episode 201 from Season 14, which aired in 2010. This episode revealed that Cartman's father was Jack Tenorman. Jack Tenorman was a former player for the Denver Broncos football team. This revelation connected to an earlier episode. In Season 5, an episode called Scott Tenorman Must Die had shown Cartman getting revenge on an older boy named Scott Tenorman. Scott had tricked Cartman and humiliated him. Cartman created an elaborate revenge scheme. He killed Scott's parents and fed them to Scott in a bowl of chili. This was one of the darkest things Cartman had ever done. The episode 201 revealed that Scott Tenorman's father, Jack, was also Cartman's father. This meant Cartman had unknowingly killed his own biological father. He had also fed his father's remains to his half-brother Scott. This added a layer of tragedy to what was already Cartman's most evil act. Cartman had committed patricide without realizing it. Other timeline revelations, several other episodes, revealed important information about South Park's continuity and timeline. These episodes expanded the show's lore in various ways. Each revelation added depth to the world and characters. One significant revelation involved the town of South Park itself. Multiple episodes established that South Park, Colorado, was not a normal town. Strange events occurred there frequently. Aliens visited regularly. Monsters appeared. Supernatural phenomena were common. Various episodes suggested reasons for why South Park attracted so much weirdness. The show also revealed origins for certain recurring elements. Chef's background was explored in episodes showing his relationship with the Super Adventure Club. Mr. Garrison's identity and sexuality were addressed across multiple episodes showing his transition and relationships. Randy Marsh's character evolved from being a background parent to becoming central to many plots, with episodes showing how he became increasingly ridiculous and attention-seeking. Time travel and timeline manipulation appeared in several episodes. The episode canceled from Season 7 revealed that aliens had been using Earth as a reality show. The episode showed that certain events in South Park's history had been manipulated by these alien producers. Another episode called Go God Go showed Cartman traveling to the future. The two-part story revealed what South Park's world looked like hundreds of years in the future. Character development through continuity. These major timeline episodes allowed South Park to develop its characters beyond their initial one-dimensional personalities. Kenny was revealed to be more than just the poor kid who dies. He was a character dealing with a genuine curse that caused him psychological trauma. His superhero identity Mysterion showed Kenny's protective nature toward his younger sister Karen and his frustration with his family's poverty. Cartman's character became increasingly dark as the series revealed more about his past and his capacity for evil. The revelation about his father added psychological complexity to his anti-Semitic behavior toward Kyle and his general sociopathy. Cartman was not just a bratty child. He was someone capable of murder and manipulation on a disturbing level. Stan and Kyle remained relatively stable as moral centers of the show, but even they underwent development. Stan's relationship with his family, particularly his father Randy, became more central to plots. Kyle's Judaism and his role as the show's conscience became more important as the series addressed more political and social issues. The continuity episodes showed that despite South Park's reputation for being random and episodic, the show maintained a consistent timeline and mythology. Characters remembered major events from previous episodes. Relationships developed and changed over time. The town itself had a history that informed current events. These elements gave the show depth beyond its crude humor and shocking content. South Park's timeline extended from prehistoric times through the colonial era, into the Old West, through the present day, and into possible futures. The major timeline events that revealed character origins, explained mysterious phenomena, and connected earlier episodes to later ones transformed South Park from a simple comedy into a series with genuine continuity and mythology that rewarded long-term viewers who paid attention to the show's developing lore. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to major timeline events. Several episodes throughout South Park's run have revealed significant information about the show's characters and world that permanently altered the series' continuity. These episodes built upon each other to create a deeper mythology beneath the show's surface-level comedy. Kenny's immortality revealed. For the first 5 seasons of South Park, Kenny McCormick died in nearly every episode. Stan would say, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and Kyle would respond, "You bastards." The next episode would begin with Kenny alive again without explanation. This pattern continued until Season 14 provided the explanation for Kenny's recurring deaths and resurrections. The explanation came through a 3-episode story arc that aired during Season 14. The arc consisted of 3 episodes. The first was Coon 2 Hindsight, which aired on the 27th of October, 2010. The second was Mysterion Rises, which aired on the 3rd of November, 2010. The third was Coon vs. Coon and Friends, which aired on the 10th of November, 2010. These 3 episodes formed what became known as the Coon Trilogy or the Mysterion Trilogy. The story began with the boys playing superheroes. Cartman created a superhero persona called the Coon. The Coon was based on comic book characters like Batman. Cartman designed a costume with a raccoon theme. Other children in South Park also created superhero identities. They formed a superhero team called Coon and Friends. The team included Toolshed, Human Kite, Iron Maiden, Tupperware, and Mosquito. These were the superhero alter egos of Stan, Kyle, Kenny, Token, and Clyde. One superhero stood apart from the others. This was Mysterion. Mysterion wore a cape and hood that obscured his face. His identity was kept secret from the audience for multiple episodes. Mysterion first appeared in an earlier episode from Season 13 called The Coon. In that episode, Mysterion's true identity was left ambiguous. The townspeople recognized Mysterion immediately, but viewers could not tell which character was behind the mask. Mysterion's identity. During the events of the Mysterion trilogy, Cartman as the Coon became increasingly angry about not being the center of attention. The other children kicked Cartman out of Coon and Friends because of his bad behavior. Mysterion took over leadership of the superhero group. This made Cartman furious. He wanted revenge on Mysterion and Coon and Friends. A villain named Captain Hindsight appeared in the story. Captain Hindsight had the ability to provide perfect hindsight about any situation. He could always explain what people should have done differently after something went wrong. Captain Hindsight became famous and the town loved him. Cartman tried to blackmail Captain Hindsight with fake photographs. Mysterion confronted Captain Hindsight about the blackmail. Captain Hindsight said his power of perfect hindsight was a curse. He complained about how difficult it was to always know what should have been done. Mysterion responded by revealing his own curse. Mysterion said Captain Hindsight's complaints were nothing compared to what Mysterion dealt with every day. Mysterion explained his superpower. He said he could not die. Mysterion said he had experienced death countless times. Sometimes he saw a bright light when he died. Sometimes he saw heaven. Sometimes he saw hell. But no matter what, Mysterion always woke up in his bed the next morning wearing his same clothes. He said the worst part was that nobody remembered him dying. He would go to school the next day and everyone would greet him normally as if nothing had happened. Even people who had watched him die would have no memory of it. Mysterion told Captain Hindsight to pull the trigger if he did not believe him. Mysterion was holding a gun to his own head. He dared Captain Hindsight to shoot him. The other members of Coon and Friends watched in horror. Human Kite, who was Kyle's superhero identity, accidentally called out Mysterion's real name. He said, "Kenny." This revealed to viewers that Mysterion was Kenny McCormick, testing his immortality. After this revelation, Kenny continued to demonstrate his immortality throughout the trilogy. Kenny shot himself in the head to prove to his friends that he could not die. He pulled the trigger and his body fell to the ground. The next scene showed Kenny waking up in his bed. He was completely unharmed. His friends came to his house. They asked Kenny why he had run away from them during their mission. They had no memory of seeing Kenny shoot himself and die. Kenny realized his friends genuinely could not remember his deaths. He tried multiple times to make them remember. Later in the trilogy, Kenny died by being stabbed. Kyle shouted, "You bastards!" in reaction to seeing Kenny stabbed. This was Kyle's automatic response to Kenny's death. But by the next scene, Kyle had completely forgotten Kenny died. Kenny woke up in his bed again. His friends showed up and acted as if nothing had happened. Kenny became frustrated with this curse. He explained to his friends that his immortality was not cool or fun. He said it hurt every single time he died. Kyle said he thought immortality would be pretty cool. Kenny responded angrily. He said, "It's not pretty cool, Kyle. It fucking hurts." Kenny said he experienced the full pain of every death. The pain was real. The fear was real. The trauma was real. But nobody else could remember or acknowledge what he went through. The parents in Cthulhu, Kenny wanted to understand why he had this power. Mysterion went to his parents' house to question them. Kenny's parents were Stuart and Carol McCormick. They lived in poverty. Their house was small and poorly maintained. Kenny confronted them while wearing his Mysterion costume. He asked them about a cult. The other members of Kuhn and friends had discovered information about a cult dedicated to Cthulhu. Cthulhu was an elder god from horror fiction. The cult worshipped this dark deity. Kenny's parents had been members of this cult 10 years earlier. This meant they joined the cult before Kenny was born. Kenny asked his parents why they joined the cult of Cthulhu. His parents said they only went to the cult meetings for the free beer. They said the cult meetings had free alcohol and they wanted to get drunk. They did not actually worship Cthulhu or believe in the cult's teachings. They just attended for the drinks. This casual explanation of why they joined a dark cult was typical of Kenny's parents, who were portrayed as irresponsible and neglectful. During the cult meeting that Kenny's parents attended, something happened that cursed their future son with immortality. The exact mechanism was not fully explained. The cult had a saying. They would chant, "That is not dead which can eternal lie," and with strange aeons, even death may die. This phrase related to Cthulhu mythology. Whatever ritual or curse occurred during those meetings caused Kenny to be born with the inability to stay dead. The rebirth process. The final episode of the trilogy showed what happened after Kenny died. Kenny died during the episode's climax. The scene then cut to Kenny's parents in their bed. Carol McCormick woke up in panic. She said to her husband, "It's happening again." Carol went into labor. She gave birth right there in the bed. The baby she gave birth to was Kenny. The infant was already wearing Kenny's orange parka. Stuart picked up the baby Kenny. He placed the infant in Kenny's bed. The baby immediately grew to Kenny's normal age. Within moments, Kenny was back to being an 8 or 9-year-old boy. He was wearing his regular clothes and looked exactly as he had before dying. Carol said to Stuart, "We never should have gone to those stupid cult meetings." This confirmed that the cult of Cthulhu was responsible for Kenny's immortality curse. This scene explained what happened every time Kenny died throughout the series. Kenny's mother gave birth to him again. The new Kenny retained all the memories and experiences of the previous Kenny. He was not a different person. He was the same Kenny reborn in a new body, but the rest of the world had no memory of the previous Kenny dying. Time seemed to reset for everyone except Kenny himself. Earlier hints about Kenny's deaths. The Mysterion trilogy was not the first time the show addressed Kenny's deaths. An earlier episode from Season 4 had provided a hint about the rebirth process. This was the episode Cartman Joins Nambla, which aired in 2000. In that episode, Kenny's parents decided to have another baby. Kenny did not want a younger sibling. He tried to prevent the pregnancy. At the end of that episode, Kenny died. He was run over by an ambulance. Immediately after Kenny's death, Carol gave birth. The baby looked exactly like Kenny and was wearing an orange parka. Stuart said, "God, this must be the 50th time this has happened." Carol corrected him and said, 52nd. This was a joke showing that Kenny had died and been reborn 52 times by that point in the series. At the time this episode aired in 2000, viewers assumed it was just a throwaway gag. The show frequently made jokes about Kenny's deaths without explaining them seriously. But the Mysterion trilogy in 2010 revealed that the Cartman Joins Nambla episode had actually been foreshadowing the true explanation. Kenny really was being reborn by his mother each time he died. The 50th or 52nd time was not an exaggeration. It was the literal truth. Why Kenny stopped dying. Kenny died in almost every episode during seasons 1 through 5. In season 6, Kenny was killed off permanently. He remained dead for most of season 6. The show explained this by having Kenny die from a terminal illness rather than an accident. Kenny's soul briefly possessed Cartman's body. Eventually, Kenny returned in the season 6 finale, Red Sleigh Down. After his return, Kenny died much less frequently. According to Trey Parker and Matt Stone in interviews, they stopped killing Kenny in every episode because they got tired of the gag. They felt the recurring death joke had become repetitive and predictable. They also felt that Kenny's inability to speak clearly through his parka limited his development as a character. By keeping Kenny alive more often and giving him more dialogue, they could develop his personality beyond just being the character who dies. The Mysterian trilogy allowed the show to address Kenny's deaths seriously while also explaining why the deaths became less frequent. After Kenny himself became aware of his curse and expressed how much he hated it, the show could not continue killing him in every episode without it feeling cruel. The revelation that Kenny experienced real pain and trauma from each death added emotional weight that made the running gag less funny. Cartman's father mystery. Another major revelation in South Park's timeline involved the identity of Eric Cartman's father. This mystery was built up over multiple episodes in the show's early seasons. The mystery began in season 1 with a 2-part episode. The first part was Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, which aired in 1998. The second part was Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut, which aired in 1998. These episodes were the season 1 and season 2 finales, respectively. In these episodes, Cartman wanted to know who his father was. The show revealed that Cartman's mother, Leanne, had been sexually active with many men in South Park. Nearly every adult male in town was a potential candidate for being Cartman's biological father. The show built up suspense about which man was the father. The season 1 finale ended on a cliffhanger. When season 2 began, the resolution was delayed. The premiere episode was about Terrence and Philip instead of resolving Cartman's father mystery. This made viewers angry because they wanted to know the answer. Finally, the second episode of season 2 revealed that Leon Cartman was actually Cartman's father. This was possible because Leon was hermaphroditic. The show claimed she had both male and female anatomy. However, this answer was later retconned. The show changed the explanation in later episodes. The true identity of Cartman's father was revealed in the episode 201 from season 14, which aired in 2010. This episode revealed that Cartman's father was Jack Tenorman. Jack Tenorman was a former player for the Denver Broncos football team. This revelation connected to an earlier episode. In season 5, an episode called Scott Tenorman Must Die had shown Cartman getting revenge on an older boy named Scott Tenorman. Scott had tricked Cartman and humiliated him. Cartman created an elaborate revenge scheme. He killed Scott's parents and fed them to Scott in a bowl of chili. This was one of the darkest things Cartman had ever done. The episode 201 revealed that Scott Tenorman's father, Jack, was also Cartman's father. This meant Cartman had unknowingly killed his own biological father. He had also fed his father's remains to his half-brother, Scott. This added a layer of tragedy to what was already Cartman's most evil act. Cartman had committed patricide without realizing it. Other timeline revelations, several other episodes revealed important information about South Park's continuity and timeline. These episodes expanded the show's lore in various ways. Each revelation added depth to the world and characters. One significant revelation involved the town of South Park itself. Multiple episodes established that South Park, Colorado, was not a normal town. Strange events occurred there frequently. Aliens visited regularly. Monsters appeared. Supernatural phenomena were common. Various episodes suggested reasons for why South Park attracted so much weirdness. The show also revealed origins for certain recurring elements. Chef's background was explored in episodes showing his relationship with the Super Adventure Club. Mr. Garrison's identity and sexuality were addressed across multiple episodes showing his transition and relationships. Randy Marsh's character evolved from being a background parent to becoming central to many plots, with episodes showing how he became increasingly ridiculous and attention-seeking. Time travel and timeline manipulation appeared in several episodes. The episode canceled from Season 7 revealed that aliens had been using Earth as a reality show. The episode showed that certain events in South Park's history had been manipulated by these alien producers. Another episode, called Go God, Go showed Cartman traveling to the future. The two-part story revealed what South Park's world looked like hundreds of years in the future. Character development through continuity. These major timeline episodes allowed South Park to develop its characters beyond their initial one-dimensional personalities. Kenny was revealed to be more than just the poor kid who dies. He was a character dealing with a genuine curse that caused him psychological trauma. His superhero identity Mysterion showed Kenny's protective nature toward his younger sister Karen and his frustration with his family's poverty. Cartman's character became increasingly dark as the series revealed more about his past and his capacity for evil. The revelation about his father added psychological complexity to his anti-Semitic behavior toward Kyle and his general sociopathy. Cartman was not just a bratty child. He was someone capable of murder and manipulation on a disturbing level. Stan and Kyle remained relatively stable as moral centers of the show, but even they underwent development. Stan's relationship with his family, particularly his father Randy, became more central to plots. Kyle's Judaism and his role as the show's conscience became more important as the series addressed more political and social issues. The continuity episodes showed that despite South Park's reputation for being random and episodic, the show maintained a consistent timeline and mythology. Characters remembered major events from previous episodes. Relationships developed and changed over time. The town itself had a history that informed current events. These elements gave the show depth beyond its crude humor and shocking content. South Park's timeline extended from prehistoric times through the colonial era, into the Old West, through the present day, and into possible futures. The major timeline events that revealed character origins, explained mysterious phenomena, and connected earlier episodes to later ones, transformed South Park from a simple comedy into a series with genuine continuity and mythology that rewarded long-term viewers who paid attention to the show's developing lore. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the far future. In South Park's timeline, there are episodes that show what happens in the distant future, hundreds or thousands of years after the present day. These episodes are significant to understanding the complete timeline of South Park's universe. The episodes Go, God, Go, and Go, God, Go, Do from Season 10, which aired on the 1st of November 2006 and the 8th of November 2006, reveal important information about South Park's far future. Cartman's impatience. The two-part future episode began in present-day South Park. Eric Cartman was extremely excited about the upcoming release of the Nintendo Wii gaming console. The Nintendo Wii was a video game system that was scheduled to be released in November of 2006. Cartman wanted the Wii immediately. He did not want to wait the few weeks until the console's release date. Cartman went to the store where the Wii would be sold. He asked the store employee when the Nintendo Wii would arrive. The employee told Cartman the exact release date. Cartman asked if there was any way to get the console earlier. The employee said no, the Wii would not be available until the official release date. There was no way to obtain it sooner. Cartman became frustrated. He went home and complained to his mother Leanne about having to wait. Leanne told Cartman he needed to be patient. Cartman said he could not wait. He wanted the Wii right now. Cartman decided he would find a way to get the Wii without waiting. The freezing plan. Cartman developed a plan. He remembered a movie where a character froze himself and woke up in the future. This was a reference to multiple science fiction stories and films featuring cryogenic freezing. Cartman decided he would freeze himself until the Nintendo Wii was released. He would go to sleep and wake up on the release date. This way, the waiting time would pass instantly from his perspective. Cartman asked Butters Stotch for help with his plan. Butters agreed to assist Cartman. The two boys went to a snowy area in the mountains outside South Park. Cartman explained to Butters exactly what needed to happen. Cartman would bury himself in the snow. The snow would freeze Cartman's body. Butters would dig Cartman out on the Nintendo Wii release date. Cartman lay down in the snow. Butters began piling snow on top of Cartman's body. Cartman gave Butters specific instructions. He told Butters to dig him up on November 12, 2006. This was the Wii release date. Butters said he understood. Butters completely buried Cartman under the snow. Only a small flag marked the spot where Cartman was buried. Butters left the mountain to return home. Cartman remained frozen under the snow. His body temperature began dropping. Cartman's plan was to enter a state of suspended animation similar to hibernation. He believed his body would be preserved by the cold until Butters dug him up. Butters forgets days past. Butters was at home. His mother asked him what he had been doing. Butters said he had been helping Cartman with something. His mother asked what he had helped Cartman with. Butters suddenly realized he had completely forgotten about Cartman. He had forgotten that Cartman was buried in the snow waiting to be dug up. Butters panicked. He said he was supposed to dig up Cartman. His mother asked when he was supposed to dig up Cartman. Butters said he was supposed to dig up Cartman on the day the Nintendo Wii came out. His mother asked when that was. Butters realized he did not remember the exact date. He said it was sometime soon. Butters went to his room. He tried to remember what Cartman had told him. Butters could not remember the specific date. He became worried that Cartman would be angry if he dug him up on the wrong day. Butters decided to wait until he was sure about the date. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Butters kept forgetting to dig up Cartman. The avalanche. While Cartman was frozen under the snow, a massive avalanche occurred in the mountains. The avalanche was caused by climate change and shifting weather patterns. Large amounts of snow and ice broke loose from the mountain peaks. The avalanche cascaded down the mountainside. The moving snow buried Cartman even deeper, under layers of ice and rock. The avalanche continued for several minutes. When it finally stopped, Cartman was buried under hundreds of feet of glacial ice. The small flag that marked his location was gone. There was no indication of where Cartman's frozen body was located. The ice and snow compressed around Cartman. His body became completely encased in solid ice. More snow fell over the following days and weeks. The ice layer containing Cartman's body became part of a permanent glacier. The glacier slowly moved down the mountain over time. Cartman's frozen body moved with the glacier. Years passed, decades passed, centuries passed. Cartman remained frozen in the ice. The year 2546. Cartman's frozen body stayed trapped in the ice for approximately 500 years. The glacier continued moving slowly down the mountain throughout this time period. Eventually, in the year 2546, the glacier reached a lower elevation. The climate at this lower elevation was warmer. The ice began to melt. A group of future humans discovered the melting glacier. These humans were part of a scientific expedition studying ancient ice formations. They were looking for preserved specimens from the past. The scientists used scanning equipment to examine the ice. Their scanners detected something unusual inside the glacier. There was a human body frozen in the ice. The scientists carefully extracted the block of ice containing the frozen body. They brought the ice block to their laboratory facility. The facility was located in what used to be South Park, Colorado. The town had changed dramatically over 500 years. The scientists began the process of thawing the frozen specimen. The future world. While the thawing process occurred, the episode showed what the world looked like in the year 2546. Society had changed completely from the world of 2006. Technology had advanced significantly. Buildings were taller and made of different materials. Vehicles flew through the air. Instead of driving on roads, people wore different styles of clothing that looked futuristic. However, the most significant change was not technological. The most significant change was religious. Over the 500 years since 2006, humanity had united under a single philosophy. This philosophy was atheism. Religion had been abolished. Everyone in the world was an atheist. There were no churches, mosques, synagogues, or temples. All religious belief had been eliminated from human society. This did not mean the world was peaceful. The atheists had divided into different factions based on how atheism should be practiced. There were three main atheist factions. Each faction believed they had the correct interpretation of atheism. The three factions were at war with each other over these differences. The three atheist factions. The first faction was called the United Atheist Alliance. This group was abbreviated as UAA. The United Atheist Alliance believed that atheism should be expressed through science and logic. They had a symbol that looked like a stylized letter A. The UAA controlled territory in what used to be the western United States. The second faction was called the Allied Atheist Alliance. This group was abbreviated as AAA. The Allied Atheist Alliance also believed in science and logic, but they had slightly different ideas about how atheist society should be organized. They had a different symbol that also involved the letter A. The AA controlled territory in what used to be the central United States. The third faction was called the Unified Atheist League. This group had yet another interpretation of how atheism should work. They believed their version was the only correct version. The Unified Atheist League was also at war with the other two factions. Despite all three groups being atheists, they fought wars against each other. They used advanced weapons technology to kill members of the other factions. Thousands of people died in these atheist wars. The different factions hated each other and viewed the other groups as enemies that needed to be destroyed. Cartman awakens. The scientists successfully thawed Cartman's frozen body. They had used advanced medical technology to revive him from his 500-year state of suspended animation. Cartman opened his eyes. He looked around the laboratory. He saw the futuristic equipment and the scientists in their strange clothing. Cartman sat up. He asked where he was. The scientists told him he was in South Park. Cartman looked confused. He said South Park did not look like this. The scientists explained that 500 years had passed. Cartman had been frozen for 5 centuries. The year was now 2546. Cartman processed this information. He asked if the Nintendo Wii was out yet. The scientists did not understand what Cartman was talking about. Cartman explained he had frozen himself so he would not have to wait for the Wii to be released. The scientists told Cartman that video game consoles from his era no longer existed. Technology had advanced far beyond the Nintendo Wii. Cartman became upset. He said he had only wanted to wait a few weeks. He had not intended to sleep for 500 years. Cartman blamed Butters for not digging him up on time. The scientists did not know who Butters was. They explained that everyone Cartman had known in 2006 was long dead. Cartman's mother, his friends, and everyone from his time period had died centuries ago. Learning about the future. The scientists asked Cartman questions about life in the year 2006. They were excited to have a living person from the past who could provide firsthand information about historical times. Cartman asked the scientists questions about the future. He wanted to understand what had happened over the past 500 years. The scientists explained that the world had achieved atheism. They said religion had been eliminated. All gods and religious beliefs were gone. Cartman asked if this meant people were peaceful now. The scientists said no. They explained that atheists were at war with each other over how to properly practice atheism. Cartman pointed out that this seemed contradictory. He said if everyone was an atheist, there should be no religious wars. The scientists said these were not religious wars. These were atheist wars. The different atheist factions had fundamental disagreements about atheist philosophy. These disagreements were important enough to fight wars over. One scientist asked Cartman what religion he had followed in 2006. Cartman said he was Catholic. All the scientists gasped in shock and horror. They said Catholicism was an ancient, primitive belief system. They asked Cartman to explain what Catholics believed. Cartman said Catholics believed in God and Jesus Christ. The scientists were fascinated and disturbed by these ancient concepts. The atheist war escalates. While Cartman was learning about the future, the war between the atheist factions intensified. The United Atheist Alliance launched an attack on an Allied Atheist Alliance position. The two factions fought a major battle. Soldiers from both sides died in the fighting. Advanced weapons caused massive destruction. A leader from the United Atheist Alliance gave a speech to his troops. He said they needed to destroy the Allied Atheist Alliance because the AIA had the wrong ideas about atheism. He said only the UAA understood the true meaning of being an atheist. His soldiers cheered. They prepared to continue fighting. Meanwhile, the Allied Atheist Alliance was having a similar meeting. Their leader gave a speech saying the United Atheist Alliance was wrong about everything. He said the OAA was the only faction that truly understood atheism. His soldiers also cheered. Both sides were completely convinced they were right and the other side was wrong. The Unified Atheist League was also involved in the war. They fought against both the UAA and the RA. The League believed both other factions were incorrect. The three-way war continued with no end in sight. Cartman's role. The United Atheist Alliance decided to use Cartman for strategic purposes. They believed that having a person from the past could give them an advantage in the war. They assigned a soldier named Brooks to watch over Cartman. Brooks was tasked with keeping Cartman safe and learning information from him. Brooks explained more about the future to Cartman. He showed Cartman the UAA's military base. The base had advanced technology including energy weapons and flying vehicles. Brooks said the UAA needed to win the war against the other atheist factions. He said the future of humanity depended on the UAA's victory. Cartman asked why it mattered which atheist faction won. Cartman said all three groups seemed basically the same. Brooks was offended by this suggestion. He said the UAA was completely different from the AA and the League. He said these differences were fundamental and important. Brooks explained one of the key differences. He said the UAA believed the correct name for atheist organization should be the United Atheist Alliance. The AA believed it should be called the Allied Atheist Alliance. The Unified Atheist League believed it should be called the Unified Atheist League. These naming differences were considered extremely important by all three factions. The Sea Otters. The episode revealed another significant change from 2006 to 2546. Evolution had continued over the 500 years. One species had evolved rapidly during this time. Sea otters had developed human-level intelligence. The otters could speak. They could use tools. They could build technology. The intelligent sea otters had formed their own atheist faction. This faction was called the Atheist Sea Otters. The otters believed they had the correct interpretation of atheism. They were also at war with the three human atheist factions. This meant there were actually 4 different groups fighting over atheism. The sea otters had developed weapons and technology equal to human technology. They piloted vehicles and wore clothing. The otters stood upright on their hind legs like humans. They had built underwater cities and surface bases. The otters were shown fighting battles against human soldiers. One sea otter leader gave a speech to his followers. He said the humans had the wrong ideas about atheism. He said only the sea otters truly understood how to be proper atheists. The otter soldiers prepared for battle against the humans. Cartman's plan. Cartman realized the future was terrible. He had expected the future to be better than 2006. Instead, the future was worse. People were still fighting wars. The wars were just about different things. Cartman decided he wanted to return to his own time period. Cartman asked the scientists if time travel was possible. The scientists said that traveling backwards in time was impossible according to the laws of physics. However, they explained that traveling forward in time was theoretically possible through faster-than-light space travel. Cartman said that did not help him since he needed to go backwards. Cartman realized he was stuck in the year 2546. He could never return to 2006. He would never see his mother or his friends again. He would never get to play the Nintendo Wii on its release day. Cartman became depressed about this situation. Brooks tried to cheer Cartman up. He said Cartman could have a good life in the future. He said Cartman could help the UAA win the atheist war. Cartman said he did not care about the atheist war. Cartman said the whole war was stupid because all the factions were basically the same. The peace proposal Cartman decided to try to end the atheist war. He believed that if he could make peace between the factions, the future might become a better place to live. Cartman requested a meeting with leaders from all 3 human atheist factions and the Sea Otter faction. The leaders agreed to meet with the person from the past. They were curious what Cartman had to say. The meeting took place in a neutral location. Leaders from the United Atheist Alliance, Allied Atheist Alliance, Unified Atheist League, and Atheist Sea Otters all attended. Cartman stood in front of the 4 faction leaders. He explained that he had come from the year 2006. He said, in his time, people fought wars over religion. He said the future people had eliminated religion but were now fighting wars over atheism. Cartman said this made no sense. Cartman pointed out that all 4 factions were atheists. They all agreed there was no God. They all agreed science and logic were important. The only thing they disagreed about was tiny details of atheist philosophy. Cartman said these differences were not important enough to kill each other over. The factions respond. The leader of the United Atheist Alliance responded to Cartman's speech. He said Cartman did not understand. He said the differences between the factions were fundamental. He said the UAA could not accept the A's version of atheism because it was wrong. The name Allied Atheist Alliance was incorrect. The proper name was United Atheist Alliance. The leader of the Allied Atheist Alliance stood up. He said the UAA leader was the one who was wrong. He said Allied Atheist Alliance was the correct name. He said that AA had the right philosophy and the UAA was spreading lies. The leader of the Unified Atheist League said both the UAA and AA were wrong. He said only the League understood true atheism. The Sea Otter leader squeaked and barked, explaining in otter language that the otters were the only ones who truly understood how to be atheists. Cartman tried to explain again that these differences did not matter. He said they should focus on what they had in common, instead of fighting over small details. The faction leaders all rejected this idea. They said their differences were not small. They said these were important philosophical points that could not be compromised. The scientific solution. One of the scientists from the group that had discovered Cartman proposed a solution. He suggested they use science to determine which faction had the correct name and philosophy. They would use pure logic to figure out the objectively correct answer. Whichever faction was proven correct by science would be declared the winner. The other factions would have to accept the scientific verdict. All 4 faction leaders agreed this was acceptable. They said they trusted science and logic. They would accept whatever answer science provided. The scientists began analyzing the different faction names and philosophies using mathematical and logical principles. The scientists worked for several hours. They used advanced computers to process the information. They applied logical analysis to the question of which faction had the correct interpretation of atheism. Finally, the scientists reached a conclusion. The lead scientist announced the results. He said that according to pure scientific logic, the correct name for an atheist organization should have 3 A's. This meant the name should be the Allied Atheist Alliance because it had 3 A's in the abbreviation AIA. The United Atheist Alliance only had 2 A's. The Unified Atheist League also had fewer than 3 A's. The aftermath of the decision. The Allied Atheist Alliance celebrated their scientific victory. They had been proven correct by science and logic. Their faction name was objectively superior. The AA soldiers cheered. Their leader gave a speech saying this proved the AA had been right all along about everything. The United Atheist Alliance and the Unified Atheist League were forced to accept the scientific verdict. Both factions agreed to dissolve. Their members joined the Allied Atheist Alliance. The 3 human factions were now unified under the AA banner. However, the Sea Otters refused to accept the verdict. The Sea Otter leader said the test was biased toward humans. He said otters did not use the same language structure as humans. The Otter faction continued to fight against the now unified human atheist faction. The war between humans and otters intensified. Without the human factions fighting each other, all human forces were focused on fighting the otters. The otters were outnumbered but fought fiercely. The war would apparently continue for years into the future. Cartman's final days in the future. Cartman realized he had not actually solved anything. The atheists were still at war. The war was now between humans and otters instead of between human factions, but people were still dying. Cartman had made things slightly better but not good. Cartman asked the scientists if there was any possibility of returning to 2006. The scientists said there was one theoretical possibility. If someone traveled faster than the speed of light while orbiting a black hole, time distortion effects might send them backwards in time. However, this was purely theoretical. No one had ever attempted it. The chances of success were extremely low. The chances of death were extremely high. Cartman decided to try it anyway. He said he would rather die attempting to return home than live in the terrible future of 2546. The scientists agreed to help him. They had a spacecraft that could potentially travel fast enough. They programmed the ship to orbit a black hole at faster-than-light speeds. The time travel attempt Cartman got into the spacecraft. The scientists sealed the hatch. Cartman sat in the pilot seat. The scientists gave him instructions through the communication system. They told him exactly when to activate the faster-than-light drive while orbiting the black hole. The spacecraft launched from Earth. It flew through space toward the nearest black hole. The journey took several weeks. Cartman spent this time alone in the spacecraft, thinking about everything he had seen in the future. He thought about how humanity had eliminated religion only to fight wars over atheism. He thought about how nothing had really improved in 500 years. The spacecraft reached the black hole. Cartman could see the massive gravitational distortion on his view screen. The black hole warped space and time around it. Cartman followed the scientists' instructions. He activated the faster-than-light drive while entering orbit around the black hole. The spacecraft began moving faster than light. Time distortion effects started immediately. Cartman saw strange colors and lights outside the ship. His body felt like it was being stretched and compressed simultaneously. The ship shook violently. Cartman held onto his seat. Return to 2006. Suddenly, the shaking stopped. The lights returned to normal. Cartman looked at the ship's instruments. According to the temporal sensors, the time travel had worked. Cartman was back in the year 2006. The spacecraft was in orbit above Earth. Cartman had successfully traveled backwards in time by 540 years. Cartman used the spacecraft's communication system to contact Earth. He spoke to air traffic control. He explained that he needed to land in South Park, Colorado. The air traffic controllers were confused about where this spacecraft had come from, but they gave Cartman landing clearance. The spacecraft descended through Earth's atmosphere. It landed in a field outside South Park. Cartman exited the spacecraft. He looked around at the world of 2006. Everything looked exactly as he remembered. The buildings were from his time period. The vehicles drove on the ground instead of flying. People wore 2006 clothing styles. Cartman ran toward South Park. He was excited to be home. He ran through the streets to his house. He burst through his front door. His mother, Leanne, was sitting on the couch watching television. She looked up in surprise when Cartman ran in. Back home. Leanne asked Cartman where he had been. She said he had been gone for hours. Cartman tried to explain that he had been frozen for 500 years and had seen the terrible atheist future. Leanne did not understand what Cartman was talking about. From her perspective, Cartman had only been gone since that morning. Cartman asked what day it was. Leanne told him the date. Cartman realized it was still before the Nintendo Wii release date. He had returned to 2006 before the Wii came out. This meant he still had to wait for the console's release. However, Cartman decided he was happy to wait. Waiting a few weeks was much better than being trapped 500 years in the future. Cartman went to find his friends. He found Stan, Kyle, and Kenny at their usual meeting spot. Cartman told them about his experience in the future. He explained that he had been frozen, woken up in 2546, seen the atheist wars, traveled back in time, and returned home. The other boys did not believe him. Kyle said Cartman was making up a ridiculous story. Stan said Cartman probably just fell asleep in the snow and dreamed everything. Kenny made a muffled comment through his parka expressing skepticism. Cartman insisted it had really happened. The boys continued to not believe him. The episode's conclusion. The episode ended with Cartman realizing that even though he had experienced an incredible adventure through time, nobody would ever believe his story. He had seen the future of humanity. He had witnessed how eliminating religion did not end conflict. He had learned that humans would find reasons to fight wars no matter what. Cartman decided not to try to convince anyone about what had happened. He would simply wait patiently for the Nintendo Wii release date. He had learned the value of patience through his experience. Waiting a few weeks no longer seemed difficult after waiting 500 years. The final scene showed Cartman sitting on his couch watching television with his mother. He was content to be home in his own time period. The future spacecraft was still sitting in the field outside town. Eventually, government agents would discover it and take it away for study. But Cartman's adventure through time was over. The importance of Go God, Go to South Park lore. These episodes are extremely important to South Park's timeline because they establish several key facts about the show's universe and its approach to religion, philosophy, and human nature. First, the episodes reveal that time travel in South Park is possible under certain extreme circumstances. Cartman successfully traveled both forward and backward through time, confirming that the laws of physics in South Park's universe allow for temporal displacement. Second, the episodes establish that South Park's timeline extends at least 500 years into the future. The world of 2546 exists within the show's continuity. This future represents one possible timeline for how events might unfold if humanity follows a certain path of philosophical development. Third, the episodes demonstrate South Park's satirical perspective on atheism and religious conflict. By showing a future where atheists fight wars over atheism, the show criticized both religious warfare and the idea that eliminating religion would eliminate human conflict. The episode suggested that humans will find reasons to fight each other regardless of whether they believe in God or not. Fourth, the episodes revealed that evolution continues in South Park's universe. The sea otters developed human-level intelligence over 500 years, showing that evolution operates on accelerated timescales in the show's world compared to reality. This established that non-human species could potentially develop intelligence and civilization. Fifth, the episodes confirmed that Cartman is willing to go to absurd extremes to avoid waiting for things he wants. His decision to freeze himself rather than wait 3 weeks for a video game console demonstrated his complete lack of patience and his inability to tolerate delayed gratification. This character trait had been shown in previous episodes, but was taken to its logical extreme in this story. Whether through showing a future where atheist factions wage wars over minor philosophical differences, or demonstrating that human conflict continues regardless of belief systems. The Go God Go episodes extended South Park's timeline 500 years forward while using that future setting to comment on present-day religious and philosophical conflicts, ultimately suggesting that the human tendency toward tribalism and warfare transcends any particular ideology or belief system. Other alternate timeline episodes beyond the far future shown in Go God Go, South Park explored alternate timelines and parallel universes in several other episodes. These episodes revealed that multiple versions of South Park could exist simultaneously across different dimensions and timeline branches. The concept of alternate realities became an important part of the show's mythology. One significant exploration of alternate timelines occurred in the episode The Poor Kid from Season 15, which aired on the 16th of November 2011. While this episode primarily focused on Kenny's family situation, it contained references to alternate versions of events and characters. The episode showed that depending on which choices characters made, their lives could turn out very differently. Imagination Land and Reality Layers. A major exploration of alternate realities came through the 3-part Imagination Land trilogy from Season 11. These episodes aired on the 17th of October, 2007, the 24th of October, 2007, and the 31st of October, 2007. The 3 episodes were titled Imagination Land Episode 1, Imagination Land Episode 2, and Imagination Land Episode 3. This trilogy revealed important information about how reality worked in South Park's universe. The story began with the boys encountering a leprechaun in the woods outside South Park. Cartman bet Kyle that leprechauns were not real. Kyle bet Cartman that leprechauns did not exist. When they found an actual leprechaun, Kyle lost the bet. According to the terms of the bet, Kyle had to perform a humiliating act on Cartman. Kyle tried to avoid honoring the bet. Before Kyle could pay up, terrorists attacked. The terrorists were not normal terrorists, they were imaginary terrorists. The attack happened in Imagination Land. This was a realm where all imaginary characters existed. Imagination Land was revealed to be an actual place that could be visited. All fictional characters from every story ever created lived together in Imagination Land. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny and Butters were transported to Imagination Land during the terrorist attack. They saw characters from movies, television shows, books, and mythology all living together. Superman was there. Luke Skywalker was there. Characters from children's stories stood next to characters from horror films. Imagination Land was organized into different sections based on what type of characters lived in each area. The breach between good and evil Imagination Land was divided into two main sections. One section contained good imaginary characters. The other section contained evil imaginary characters. A barrier separated the good side from the evil side. This barrier kept evil characters like monsters and villains contained in their own area. The good characters could live peacefully without being attacked by the evil characters. The terrorist attack damaged the barrier. The barrier began breaking down. Evil imaginary characters started crossing over into the good side of Imagination Land. Monsters and villains began attacking the good characters. Characters like Strawberry Shortcake and Care Bears were being slaughtered by creatures like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. The boys became trapped in Imagination Land while this chaos was happening. They witnessed imaginary characters killing each other. The evil characters were winning. They were destroying the good side of Imagination Land. If Imagination Land was completely destroyed, it would affect the real world. This was because imagination was connected to reality in fundamental ways. The military response. Back in the real world, the United States government learned about Imagination Land. Government officials held meetings to discuss the threat. They decided the imaginary world posed a danger to national security. The military developed a plan to deal with Imagination Land. The government's solution was to destroy Imagination Land completely. They would detonate a nuclear weapon inside the imaginary realm. This would eliminate all imaginary characters and prevent them from threatening reality. Military personnel prepared to execute this plan. Meanwhile, Cartman was still focused on making Kyle honor their bet. Cartman took Kyle to court to legally force Kyle to perform the humiliating act. A judge heard the case. The judge ruled in Cartman's favor. The court ordered Kyle to fulfill the terms of the bet. Kyle was horrified but legally obligated to comply. Butters' role as the key inside Imagination Land, the boys discovered that one of them was special. Butters Stotch had the power to imagine things so strongly that they became real within Imagination Land. The imaginary characters explained that certain people had powerful imaginations. These people could create or destroy things in Imagination Land just by thinking about them. The imaginary characters needed Butters to imagine something that would save Imagination Land. They asked Butters to imagine the barrier being repaired. Butters tried to imagine the barrier fixed. But Butters' imagination was not strong enough. The evil characters continued breaking through. More good characters died. The military launched their nuclear missile. The missile was heading toward Imagination Land. It would arrive within minutes. If the missile detonated, everyone inside Imagination Land would be destroyed. This included Butters and any other real people still trapped there. The nature of imagination and reality. The imaginary characters held a council to discuss their situation. They debated the nature of their existence. One character argued that imaginary things were not real and therefore did not matter. Another character countered that imaginary things were real because people believed in them. The debate became philosophical. A wise imaginary character explained the truth. He said imaginary characters were real in their own way. They existed because humans imagined them. The power of human imagination gave them life and meaning. If humans stopped imagining, the characters would cease to exist. But as long as humans continued to imagine, the characters were real. This explained why Imagination Land was important. Destroying Imagination Land would destroy humanity's ability to imagine. Without imagination, humans would lose creativity, art, stories, and hope. The real world needed Imagination Land to exist. The two realms were connected and dependent on each other. The resolution Butters finally understood what he needed to do. He needed to imagine something powerful enough to save Imagination Land and stop the nuclear missile. Butters closed his eyes. He concentrated with all his mental strength. He imagined the most powerful good character he could think of. Butters imagined Jesus Christ riding on top of the nuclear missile. This imaginary Jesus redirected the missile away from Imagination Land. The missile exploded harmlessly in empty imaginary space. Imagination Land was saved from nuclear destruction. But the evil characters were still rampaging through the good side. Butters needed to imagine something else. The imaginary characters helped Butters focus his imagination. Together, they imagined the barrier being rebuilt. The barrier materialized and separated the two sides again. The evil characters were pushed back to their own section. Imagination Land was restored to its original state. The boys were able to return to the real world. They appeared back in South Park. The crisis was over. Imagination Land continued to exist as a separate realm parallel to reality. Kyle honors the bet. After returning from Imagination Land, Kyle tried to argue that the bet should be voided. Kyle said the leprechaun had been part of Imagination Land, not reality. Therefore, the leprechaun was imaginary and did not count. Cartman rejected this argument. The court ruling still stood. Kyle was legally required to honor the bet. Kyle reluctantly agreed to comply. The episode ended with Kyle preparing to perform the humiliating act. The scene cut to black before showing what happened. This left the exact nature of Kyle's payment ambiguous, but the implication was clear that Kyle had to do something extremely embarrassing to satisfy the bet. The importance of Imagination Land to timeline lore. The Imagination Land trilogy established that South Park's universe contained multiple layers of reality. There was the normal physical reality where the characters lived. There was also Imagination Land, which existed as a parallel realm. These two realities were separate but connected. Events in one realm could affect the other realm. This meant South Park's timeline was not just a single linear progression. The timeline existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Imaginary events had real consequences. Real people could travel to imaginary places. The boundary between fiction and reality was permeable. The trilogy also revealed that imagination had power in South Park's universe. People with strong imaginations could create or change things in Imagination Land. This suggested that creativity and belief could literally alter reality. What people imagined became real in some sense. Cartman finds himself in an alternate timeline. Another exploration of alternate timelines occurred in the two-part finale of Season 23. The episodes were titled Basic Cable and Christmas Snow. These episodes aired in 2019 and showed Cartman experiencing an alternate version of his life. The story involved Cartman's family losing their cable television service. Cartman was furious about not having cable. His mother, Leanne, had canceled the service because she could not afford it. Cartman needed cable to watch his favorite shows. He tried various schemes to get cable restored to his house. During one of Cartman's schemes, something strange happened. Reality shifted. Cartman found himself in a slightly different version of South Park. In this alternate timeline, small details were different. The town looked mostly the same, but certain things had changed. People he knew acted slightly differently. Cartman initially did not notice he was in an alternate timeline. The differences were subtle, but as Cartman spent more time in this alternate reality, he began to realize something was wrong. Events did not happen the way he remembered. People referenced things that Cartman had no memory of. The timeline had diverged from his original reality. Branching timeline mechanics. The episode suggested that timelines could branch based on decisions people made. When someone made an important choice, reality split into multiple versions. Each version represented a different outcome of that choice. These parallel timelines existed simultaneously in different dimensions. Cartman's original timeline continued to exist, but Cartman himself had been shifted into a different branch. He was now living in a timeline where different choices had been made in the past. The consequences of those different choices had created a slightly altered version of South Park. This concept of branching timelines explained apparent contradictions in South Park's continuity. When the show presented conflicting versions of events, it was because those events happened in different timeline branches. Each branch was equally real. Characters could potentially move between branches under certain circumstances. The Streaming Wars episodes Season 25 and 26 featured a series of special episodes that dealt with time, memory, and alternate versions of South Park. These episodes were released as streaming specials rather than regular broadcast episodes. The special showed adult versions of the main characters dealing with changes in their lives and town. One special, called South Park, post-COVID, aired on the 25th of November 2021. This special showed an alternate future timeline where the main characters were adults. The special took place approximately 40 years after the present day. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were middle-aged adults. The special showed what their lives had become. In this future timeline, South Park had changed significantly. The town had been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent events. The characters had grown apart over the years. They had not stayed friends after childhood. Each character had followed a different life path. Stan had become a cynical consultant. Kyle had become a therapist. Cartman had converted to Judaism and had a wife and children. Kenny had died, but his consciousness existed in some form. The special showed these adult versions dealing with the consequences of choices they made in their youth. Post-COVID Part 2. A sequel special aired on the 16th of December 2021. This was titled South Park Post-COVID, The Return of COVID. This special revealed that the future shown in the first special was just one possible timeline. The adult characters discovered they could change the past to create a different future. The special involved time travel back to the present day. The adult versions of the characters had to stop an event that would lead to the dark future they came from. If they could change key moments in the past, they could create a better timeline where different outcomes occurred. This special confirmed that South Park operated on a multiverse model. Multiple timeline versions existed. The characters could move between timelines by changing the past. Every major choice created a branch point where reality split into different possibilities. The Integrity Farms continuity starting in Season 22, South Park introduced a major change to its setting. Randy Marsh, Stan's father, bought a marijuana farm called Integrity Farms. The Marsh family moved out of South Park proper and relocated to the farm. This created a significant shift in the show's status quo. For several seasons, episodes alternated between storylines set in the town of South Park and storylines set at Integrity Farms. This dual setting created something like parallel tracks in the timeline. Events happened simultaneously in both locations. The show would jump between these locations within episodes and between episodes. Some fans theorized this represented different timeline branches. One timeline featured the Marshes living in town. Another timeline featured them at the farm. The show was supposedly showing both timelines alternately. However, the show itself treated the farm as a simple change of residence rather than an alternate reality. Eventually, Randy gave up the farm and the Marsh family moved back to town. This resolved the dual location issue. The timeline consolidated back into a single track. But the Integrity Farms period demonstrated how South Park could maintain multiple simultaneous continuities when needed. Continuity errors as timeline branch. Throughout its long run, South Park has featured numerous apparent continuity errors. Characters have contradictory backstories. Events are referenced differently in different episodes. The show's creators have sometimes acknowledged these contradictions rather than trying to fix them. One interpretation fans developed was that these contradictions represented different timeline branches. Each episode might take place in a slightly different version of South Park's universe. What appeared to be continuity errors were actually accurate depictions of alternate timelines. For example, Kenny's family has been shown living in different houses in different episodes. In some episodes, they live in a small house near the railroad tracks. In other episodes, their house is in a different location. Rather than being an animation error, this could represent different timeline branches where the McCormicks made different housing choices. Similarly, character relationships and histories have varied across episodes. Mr. Garrison has had different romantic partners and life experiences depending on the episode. Rather than treating this as inconsistent writing, fans could interpret each version as real within its own timeline branch. The Christmas Special Alternate Realities. Various South Park Christmas specials have featured alternate versions of reality. One special showed what South Park would be like if certain characters had never been born. This was similar to the classic film It's a Wonderful Life. Characters saw alternate timeline versions where they did not exist. These alternate timelines showed how the town would be different without specific individuals. If Stan had never been born, Kyle would have different friends. If Cartman had never existed, South Park would be more peaceful. If Kenny had never existed, someone else would be the poor kid who dies constantly. The specials used these alternate realities to emphasize how characters affected each other's lives. The characters came to appreciate their relationships after seeing versions of reality where those relationships never formed. This reinforced that the main timeline where all characters existed together was valuable and worth preserving. The pandemic specials and multiple futures. The pandemic specials from 2020 and 2021 showed multiple possible futures for South Park. These specials depicted various ways the COVID-19 pandemic could affect the town and its residents. Different specials showed different outcomes of how people responded to the pandemic. In one possible future, South Park had adapted to pandemic life and created new systems. In another possible future, the pandemic had caused society to collapse. In yet another possible future, the pandemic had been resolved and life returned to normal. Each special presented one potential timeline branch. The post-COVID specials mentioned earlier were part of this exploration of pandemic futures. The show was using its alternate timeline mechanics to explore different possibilities for how current events might affect the characters' lives. Rather than committing to one official future, the show presented multiple valid futures. Time travel technology and methods. Across various episodes, South Park has shown multiple methods of time travel. Cartman traveled to the future by freezing himself. Adult characters in post-COVID had some technology that allowed them to communicate across time. The show has referenced time machines and temporal portals in various episodes. These different time travel methods suggested that moving through time was possible through multiple approaches. Technological methods could work. Magical methods could work. Even seemingly ridiculous methods like electrocuting yourself while watching history documentaries could work. Time travel had no single correct mechanism in South Park's universe. The important consistent rule was that time travel had consequences. Changing the past created new timeline branches. Going to the future meant experiencing one possible outcome that might not occur in the main timeline. Time travelers had to be careful about what they changed or learned. The importance of alternate timelines to South Park lore. The alternate timeline episodes establish crucial facts about how South Park's universe operates. First, the episodes confirm that multiple versions of South Park exist simultaneously across different dimensions and timeline branches. The main show depicts one primary timeline, but countless other versions exist in parallel. Second, the episodes reveal that choices create timeline branches. Every significant decision splits reality into multiple paths. Each path represents a different outcome. These branches are equally real. Characters can potentially access or experience different branches under specific circumstances. Third, the episodes demonstrate that imagination and fictional realms exist as real alternate dimensions. Imagination Land is as real as South Park itself. The boundary between fiction and reality is permeable. Imaginary events can have real consequences and vice versa. Fourth, the episodes show that South Park's timeline extends in multiple directions simultaneously. The timeline goes backward into prehistory, forward into distant futures, and sideways into parallel versions. Characters can move through time and between dimensions using various methods. Fifth, the episodes suggest that apparent continuity, errors in the show, might actually represent different timeline branches. Each episode could be depicting a slightly different version of South Park's universe. This interpretation transforms inconsistencies into intentional explorations of alternate realities. The alternate timeline episodes expanded South Park's mythology from a simple chronological sequence into a complex multiverse where infinite versions of events exist simultaneously, connected by the choices characters make and the power of imagination to create new realities alongside the physical world viewers normally see. Whether shown through prehistoric icemen from 32 months ago treated as ancient history, founding fathers designing America to say one thing while doing another, childhood friendships formed in preschool and maintained through shared secrets and lies, a present-day world where aliens visit and impossibilities occur regularly, major revelations about immortality curses and hidden parentage that permanently altered character relationships, futures 500 years away where humanity fights wars over atheist philosophy, or alternate timelines branching into infinite parallel dimensions through imagination and choice. South Park's timeline extends across what residents claim is millions of years, but viewers understand as a flexible chronology that bends to serve satire rather than consistency. The show's approach to continuity reveals that in South Park's universe, time functions not as a rigid historical framework, but as a narrative tool where prehistory can be 3 years ago if that serves the joke, where characters can visit colonial Philadelphia through electrocution-induced flashbacks, where the far future and alternate dimensions exist simultaneously with the present, and where every episode potentially depicts a different timeline branch, while still contributing to a larger mythology that rewards viewers who track recurring elements across seasons. South Park maintains this contradictory relationship with time by treating every historical period, future possibility, and alternate reality with the same deadpan seriousness, documenting each era's events in exhaustive detail regardless of how absurd the premise, creating a timeline that is simultaneously deeply concerned with its own lore and completely willing to ignore that lore whenever convenient, resulting in a chronology that spans from cavemen to intelligent sea otters while remaining grounded in the everyday lives of 4 elementary school students navigating a world where the impossible and mundane exist side by side without acknowledgement of any contradiction. South Park's complete timeline demonstrates how the show treats chronology as a satirical device rather than a historical record. The timeline begins with what South Park residents believe is prehistoric prehistory, but which viewers understand as 32 months before 1999. The timeline continues through colonial America, where the Founding Fathers designed the nation's permanent contradictions. The timeline extends through the boys' preschool years, when their core relationships and shared guilt were established. The timeline encompasses the present day, where the pilot episode introduced the town and characters as they exist now. The timeline includes major revelations that explain Kenny's immortality curse and Cartman's patricidal past. The timeline reaches 500 years into the future, where atheist factions and intelligent sea otters wage philosophical wars. The timeline branches into infinite alternate dimensions through Imagination Land and multiverse mechanics. Every era receives the same exhaustive documentation, regardless of internal contradictions. The show treats a man frozen for 32 months as a prehistoric Iceman because South Park's residents choose to believe this narrative. The show treats Cartman's electrocution-induced hallucination of 1776 as genuine time travel because the information he brings back serves the satirical point about American hypocrisy. The show treats Kenny's rebirth cycle as literal truth even when this contradicts earlier throwaway jokes. The show treats future timelines and alternate dimensions as equally valid branches of reality even when they present conflicting versions of events. South Park's timeline exists not to provide consistent world building, but to give structure to satire. The chronology serves whatever commentary the show wants to make in any given episode. Historical flashbacks, future visions, and alternate realities all function as lenses through which to examine present-day issues. The timeline's flexibility allows the show to explore any time period or dimension while maintaining the core cast and setting. Characters can visit any era, witness any future, or experience any alternate reality, then return to their 4th grade classroom the next episode with minimal acknowledgement of what occurred. The comprehensive timeline reveals that South Park operates on cartoon logic elevated to mythology. The show builds elaborate lore around recurring jokes until those jokes become canonical facts. Kenny dies and resurrects because of a Cthulhu cult curse his parents joined for free beer. Cartman unknowingly murdered his biological father and fed him to his half-brother. The town of South Park has existed in some form since what residents call the Ice Age. These absurd premises are treated with complete seriousness once established, creating a mythology that is simultaneously ridiculous and internally consistent within each episode's framework. The timeline also demonstrates how South Park rewards long-term viewers while remaining accessible to new audiences. Casual viewers can enjoy individual episodes without knowing the larger continuity. Dedicated viewers who track recurring elements across seasons discover connections and callbacks that add depth to seemingly standalone stories. The show balances episodic storytelling with serialized mythology, allowing both viewing approaches to be valid. South Park's approach to time and continuity reflects the show's broader philosophy about fiction and reality. The show treats nothing as sacred while simultaneously treating everything as worthy of serious examination. Historical events, future possibilities, and imaginary realms all receive equal narrative weight. The show acknowledges that none of this actually happened while demanding viewers engage with it as if it did. This paradoxical relationship with its own fiction creates a unique viewing experience where audiences must simultaneously take the show seriously and recognize its fundamental absurdity. The complete South Park timeline, spanning from disputed prehistory through multiple possible futures, represents not a coherent chronology, but a collection of satirical tools deployed across hundreds of episodes to comment on contemporary issues through the lens of 4 elementary school students navigating a world where the impossible occurs daily and nobody questions it.